They had built the hall to make a man feel small, and that morning it worked. Every surface threw the light back at me. Gold leaf on the columns, gold thread in the banners, a floor so polished it doubled the whole rotten court above it. I stood at the center of all that shine in a plain green robe, the color they gave the D ranks, the color that told everyone in the room exactly how little I was worth before I opened my mouth. Victor stood on the dais above me. He did not raise his voice. He never had to. He said the words the way another man might brush lint off his sleeve, that I was a D rank mage, that my gift had no meaning and no value, that the court of Aurelia had no further use for me, worthless. He used that word like it settled something. Off to the side, the crimson-robed A-ranks laughed. Gregor was the loudest of them. He made a joke about my village, something about a country boy and his country magic, and the rest of them took it up, and for a moment, the hall was just the sound of important people being amused by me. I had a gift. I knew exactly what it was. Wilt recollection, the power to take a dead, browning thing and coax it back toward green, to make a withered plant bloom and bear fruit again. I had told them once, early on, what it was for. My magic can make people smile, I said. Someone near the front actually snorted. To them, it was the smallest thing in the world. Flowers did not fill a treasury. Flowers did not win wars. In Aurelia, magic was measured by what it could buy, and a man who only made dead things live again was a man who made nothing at all. Victor decided to prove the point. He turned his palm up and let them all watch the air above it thicken and harden into metal. Gold pulled out of nothing the way only an S rank could pull it. Coins, fat and bright, stacking themselves in his hand. He spoke while he did it. That gold was the only thing in this world that brought true happiness, that everything else was decoration. The court drank it in like it was scripture. Then he flicked his wrist, almost lazily, and threw the coins at my feet. One of them caught me across the cheek. A small, stupid pain, sharp and then gone. The laughter swelled behind it, warm and easy. The laughter of people who would forget my name by supper. I looked down at the gold scattered around my boots. I bent. I picked up a single coin, just the one, and I closed my hand around it. Then I bowed. A full bow, the kind they could not pretend was insolent, the kind that gave them absolutely nothing to feed on. And I turned my back on the throne and walked toward the great doors. Behind me, in a cracked stone planter beside the entrance, a dead bloom was slumped over its own brown stem. As I passed it, something stirred. The stem firmed. The brittle petals filled and softened and lifted, browning edges going green. The whole small dead thing swelling open into a flower again, quiet as a held breath. No one in that hall was looking at the doorway. They were all still looking at me, waiting for me to break. I did not give them that either. I stepped through the doors and let them close on the laughter, and not one of those brilliant, powerful people ever knew that life had bloomed in the room they had just declared empty of anything worthwhile. Outside the gates, the air was colder and somehow easier to breathe. I stood at the top of the long steps, with the coin still in my fist, and waited to feel ruined. The strange thing was that I didn't. Something heavy lifted off my chest instead. Some weight I had been carrying so long, I had stopped noticing it was there. 5 years of that court. 5 years of being the lowest thing in every room. And now, it was simply over. I opened my hand and looked at the coin. 1 gold piece, I murmured. That's what they decided 5 years were worth. It should have stung more than it did. I left my village in the cold north when I was 14, walked away from a poor home and parents who could not feed another mouth, and went to the academy chasing the idea that magic could lift a boy out of mud. What I found there was the same thing waiting for me everywhere after. The older students who shoved past me in the halls. The instructors who looked at my rank and then looked away, year after year of being the joke that everyone already knew. What I also found, somewhere in all that, was the one thing that was mine. I knelt by a dead flower bed behind the dormitories one evening, half because I missed the north, and half because I had nowhere else to be, and a withered seedling leaned back into my hand and turned green. Wilt recollection, the rarest gift in 1,000 years of records, the books said. The most useless gift in the kingdom, the court said. Both of them were sure they were right. For a long time, I had let the court be the louder voice. It is an easy thing, believing the people who are certain. They had silver robes and the whole weight of the kingdom nodding along behind them, and I had a handful of dried seeds and the memory of 1 green seedling in my palm. On the bad mornings, the arithmetic seemed simple enough. On the worse ones, I had almost stopped waking things at all, just to learn whether anyone would notice the difference. No one ever did. That was supposed to be the proof. Somehow, it never quite settled in me as proof. There was only one person who had ever made me feel like the gift was worth something. Her name was Sarah. We grew up together in the north, and she became a knight while I became a joke. And she was the only one who never once treated me like the rank stamp stamped on my robe. There were burn scars on her face, on her left cheek, and across her forehead, and the day the other children in our village mocked them until she wept. I went out and found a lilac branch and woke it into full bloom and pressed it into her hands as a charm. She had held it like it was made of glass and asked, almost afraid to believe it, whether I had truly kept it for her. I had not known how to answer. I had promised myself something that day, that somewhere out there was magic that could do for her face what I could do for a dying flower, that I would find it and I would heal her and she would never have to weep over a mirror again. It was not a small promise, and I had known even then it might be impossible. Healing magic closed fresh wounds. It did not unmake what had already healed wrong. No mage I ever met could lift an old scar from skin, but I carried a gift that did the impossible thing for flowers every single day. And if there was even a thread of a chance it could one day do the same for her, then it was worth a whole life spent looking. I was 19 now, and no closer to keeping that promise than I had been at 14. That did not mean I had given it up. But a man who can make a dead thing live again is not nothing. The court could keep their word for it. I had a different one. I closed my hand around the coin, went down the steps, and walked into the city to find work. Finding work turned out to be its own kind of banishment. I went to 5 guilds. 5. Each time the same thing happened. I gave my name, and a face that had been merely bored a second before went carefully, deliberately blank. The clerk would suddenly remember they had no openings. The board that had been thick with jobs a moment ago had nothing for a mage like me. By the 3rd one, I understood it was not bad luck. By the 5th, I had stopped being surprised. The last guildmaster at least had the decency to tell me why. He was a big man with forearms like bridge cables, and he didn't bother with the careful blank face. He just leaned on his counter and looked at me tired. Word going around is you withered the royal garden, he said. Killed the whole thing, and the great victor had to step in and remake it in gold to save the palace's pride. I didn't wither anything. My voice came out flatter than I meant it. I'm the one who kept that garden alive, he shrugged, and it was not an unkind shrug, just a helpless one. He believed me, I think. It didn't matter. The court's word reached every guild in the capital, and no honest place could afford to be seen hiring the man the court had thrown out. Cross Victor's people, and you didn't work in Aurelia either. But before I left, he lowered his voice and gave me one real thing. There was a guild down in the back alleys, he said. An underground sort of place that took in stray mages nobody else would touch. People like me. He said it the way you'd hand someone a coat in the rain. I thanked him and meant it, and I went looking for the back alleys. The city changed fast once you left the gilded streets. 2 turns off the bright avenues and the gold ran out of everything. The buildings leaned together overhead until the light came down in narrow gray strips. People crowded the doorways here. Thin people, ragged people, many of them bound to debts they would never work off, half starved in the shadow of a capital that conjured wealth out of empty air. All that gold in the towers, and none of it had ever once come down this far. I walked through it and felt something cold settle in me that had nothing to do with the air. I had carried dried twigs and seeds in a small pouch for years, foci for the gift, dead little things waiting for me to wake them. My hand was on that pouch out of habit when the man stepped into the alley ahead of me. He was ragged too, but not like the others. There was a wildness in him, a desperation strung too tight. He called himself Boyd. He told me, fast and shaking, that he had been a B-rank fire mage once, that he used to matter, and that if he brought me down, the court would let him back into the palace where he belonged. In his other hand, he held a scrying crystal turned toward us, and through it I could feel the cold attention of the men who had thrown me away, watching, wagering, enjoying the show they had arranged. I don't know you, I said, and I'm not in the mood to fight. Walk away. He didn't walk away. He threw fire. It came at me in a roaring wave, the kind of spell that would have ended most D-ranks where they stood. I pulled a dried twig from my pouch and woke it. The dead little stick swelled in a heartbeat into a thick green branch heavy with wet leaves, and the fire poured into all that living wetness and drowned itself out, hissing into steam. The heat died a hand's width from my face. Boyd stared at the steam like he couldn't understand it. He came at me again anyway, swinging the wooden haft of his weapon. That was a mistake. Wood is just a dead plant waiting to be told otherwise. I caught the haft and pushed my gift into it, and the old dry wood remembered being alive. Vines burst out of it, fast and pale and strong, twisting up his arms, looping his wrists, winding him tighter the harder he pulled. In a breath, he was on his knees in the muck, bound in the living growth of his own weapon, the fight gone out of him entirely. Don't move, I said. The more you struggle, the tighter it gets. He stopped struggling. He was beaten, but he was breathing. breathing, and he would keep breathing. I had not come down here to leave a body in the dirt for Victor's amusement. The scrying crystal in the tangle of vines cracked once, sharp as a knuckle, and went dark. Whatever the court had wanted to watch, the show was over. Let them wonder. I left Boyd where he knelt and walked deeper into the alleys. The thought came as I walked, and it would not leave me. Somewhere in this same maze of shadow and refuse, the Guildmaster's slum and 100 others like it, there was a young woman. I had heard it in passing on the way down, a beast-eared servant bound into a household service and worked half to death by people who treated her as less than a person, with no one in all this gilded city to come for her. I did not know her. I had nothing to offer anybody. I had 1 gold coin and a magic the whole world called worthless, and maybe that was exactly why I could not walk past it. I knew what it was to be looked at and counted as nothing, to stand in a bright room full of people who had already decided you did not matter, and feel the particular cold of it settle into your chest. If there was one person in this whole gilded city who woke up feeling that the way I had felt it this morning, then a worthless man with a worthless gift was still better than no one coming at all. So I could not stop thinking about her, and somehow I already knew I was going to go and find her. I had made up my mind before I reached the well. The capital was finished for me. The harassment hadn't stopped since the banishment, and it all traced back to one man, the gold mage who decided a gift like mine was worthless because it couldn't be weighed. Plant magic doesn't shine. It doesn't fill a treasury. Out on the road, working beside adventurers, I had thrown up walls of green to stop a charging beast, grown bread and fruit from a dead branch when the rations ran dry, and been thanked for it. The court called that nothing. They handed their ranks to whoever could turn lead into coin or coax a corpse back upright, and the rest of us were a waste of a robe. So I sat by a public well in the alleys, watching ordinary people scrape through ordinary days in the shadow of the gilded boulevards, and I tried to decide where a man like me even goes. That was when I heard the switch come down. A hard-faced woman had a thin young woman backed against the wall, dog-eared, brown hair hanging in her face, ears drooping flat, a basket of spilled laundry at her feet. The woman was shouting about ruined washing, and she raised her arm again. I was on my feet before I thought about it. I reached out, and the switch in her hand woke. Green ran up the dry wood, buds split open, and by the time it reached the top, it was a flowering daphne branch, pink and fragrant in her fist. She froze. "You can't beat someone with flowers," I said. She rounded on me, all teeth, demanding to know who I thought I was, and then, because that is how this city works, demanding a price. The young woman was bound to her by debt, she said, and debt's cost. I took out my coin, my whole safety net, my last wall between me and the gutter. I put it in her hand. Will this cover it? It covered it. It covered far more than it. She bit it, pocketed it, and lost all interest in the rest of us. I crouched in front of the young woman, who was staring at me like I might turn into something worse. "Come on, let's go." She kept glancing over her shoulder the whole way out of the alley, flinching at the space where the woman had been, whispering that she would be punished if she didn't go back. "You're not going back," I told her. "Not ever." I found a bench on a quieter street and sat her down. Up close she was worse than I'd thought, bruised, half-starved, watching my hands like she was waiting to learn which one would hit her. It took a while to get her name out of her, Holly. I set it back so she'd know I would keep it. I wet a cloth and cleaned the dirt and dried blood from her face and her hands, slow, naming each thing before I did it. Somewhere in the middle of it, her tail gave one small, startled wag, like it had forgotten it was allowed. There was a bare twig caught in the bench slats. I picked it up and woke it. Blossoms first, white and pink, then the fruit, swelling and ripening in under a minute until a real apple sat heavy in my palm. I held it out. She looked at it. "Flowers? Apple. It's yours." She ate like she expected someone to take it back. Then she stopped, eyes wide, and the smallest voice came out of her. "It's sweet. It's so good." I don't have a grand reason for what I did next. I just knew the shape of it too well. "I don't have a home either," I said. "They threw me out too. So we're the same." She turned the word over. "The same? Same." And that was that. Wherever I was going, she was coming with me. I didn't know where that was yet. The guilds were closed to me. The city hated her kind on sight, but I'd decided she was not going to belong to nobody ever again. Finding food turned out to be harder than freeing her. Eatery after eatery took one look at Holly's ears and found a reason to turn us out. "Full tonight," kitchens closing, that sort of thing. None of it true. I was about to give up when she tugged my sleeve. She lifted her head, nose working the air, and led me over a canal bridge to a low door I'd never have found on my own, tucked behind a fishmonger's stall, a back alley kitchen, and the smell of real broth. The aunt who ran it sized us up, glanced at Holly's ears, and, to my surprise, waved us to a corner table anyway. The food was thin and overpriced, the kind of meal that tells you more about a city than any decree. Holly ate like it was a feast. I told her I was full and slid the rest of mine across, which was half a lie and worth it. While we ate, the owners talked, and none of it was good. Harvests failing 2 years running, bread doubling, then doubling again. Salt, of all things, gone scarce. Shops shuttering up and down streets that used to be busy. The aunt leaned in and warned us flat not to take the land roads out, that there were bandits past the walls, and worse than bandits. Canals are still safe enough, she said, wiping the table. Water's the only way out worth trying. Her husband, a big rough man who looked like he'd weathered every kind of hard year, only nodded along. The capital glittered at its heart and starved everywhere else. All that conjured gold at the top, and the living land underneath it dying to pay for the shine. I'd been raised to read soil. I knew what it looked like when something was feeding on the roots. The husband offered us a room with no sign over the door. House rule, he said. No questions and no talk. I paid for it gladly. The aunt took Holly to wash. When they came back, Holly was scrubbed pink and wearing clean secondhand clothes. Her hair brushed out from her face, the bruises stark now that the grime was gone. She kept touching the soft sleeve of the borrowed blouse like she couldn't believe it was hers to wear. There was one narrow bed. She went straight for the floor and started arranging herself on the boards. Matter of fact, like that was simply where she went. I nodded at the bed. Take it, it's soft. I'll be fine down here, she argued in her small way. I didn't budge. In the end, she climbed up, stiff and disbelieving, and lay there with her eyes open a long time before they finally closed. I sat against the wall and listened to the city through the shutters. Somewhere out there, a crowd was shouting about the price of bread. Closer in, under everything, there was a kind of pressure I couldn't name, like the air before a storm that hasn't decided to break yet. Something's wrong with this whole city, I said quietly, to no one. Holly was already asleep, safe for one night. I'd take one night. What happened that same night across the city, in the Gilded Palace, I didn't see. I learned it later, in pieces, mostly from Sarah herself, and I'm going to tell it the way it was told to me, because it matters. There was a banquet. The queen had forced the princess, Diana, to host it, to flatter a western duke named Aldrich into selling the crown his grain. The duke came and ate like the famine was a rumor, loud and dripping and grinning at his own appetite, while a starving city pressed against the palace walls. Between courses, he amused himself by insulting his hosts and saved the cruelest of it for Diana's knight, Sarah. My Sarah, blue hair tied back, the old burn scars on her face that small men always think give them permission. He sneered that a scarred thing like her ought to be shipped off to die fighting monsters. Sarah went for him. The old butler, Walter, caught her arm, murmured for her to hold, and that was the only thing that kept the night from ending right there. It should have ended there, because Victor was presiding over all of it, and he'd decided Sarah was a loose thread. Quietly, without a word, he closed an invisible grip around her chest. Her breath stopped. The strength drained out of her where she stood, and no one in that bright hall even saw it happening. Then, something bloomed against her heart, the lilac, the little dried sprig I'd pressed on her years ago, back when I still believed a promise to heal her scars was a thing a boy could simply keep. Tiny blue flowers burst open across it all at once, and whatever Victor had wrapped around her tore like wet paper. She dragged in a breath. She came back, and then she drew her saber. "Insult her again," she told the duke, the steel rising with her. "And it's the last thing you ever say." He squealed for help. She didn't blink. "Bow. Apologize to the princess. Now." He panicked instead and lunged at her with a dinner knife. She answered with one short stroke. The strike drew blood and ended the moment, and she stepped back before it was even finished. The hall erupted into shouting and rushing guards. Victor moved to finish what his spell had started. Walter stepped into his path, raised a single fist, and said very calmly that stopping a heart took 3 seconds, and his fist was faster than that. For once, Victor backed away. "Sarah, don't!" Diana was crying out, reaching for her knight through the chaos. But it was already over. The Duke was on the floor. The spell was broken, and across the whole city, a man he'd never think twice about had just reached out and saved the woman he loved without lifting a hand. I just didn't know it yet. The queen heard about all of it the next morning, and she could not have cared less. To her, it was a drunken squabble, a small mess to be tidied. So she tidied it. She handed Diana to the Duke in marriage as compensation for his bruised pride, as if a princess were a coin you slide across a table to settle a debt. She ordered Sarah's sword taken away, and the knight reduced to a serving attendant, a swordswoman who just saved her ward's life, stripped of the one thing that made her herself. And then, in the same breath, she summoned Victor and told him to forge her a new crown, gold coiled with twin serpents, while her people lined up for bread that wasn't there. Victor bowed and made the whole incident disappear. It suited him perfectly. The thread he'd wanted cut was being cut for him by the throne with a smile. None of this reached me that night. I was sitting on a bare floor in a room with no name over the door, listening to a young woman breathe easy in her sleep for what might have been the first time in her life, while a queen sold a princess and broke a knight to keep her crown shining. The city was holding its breath, so was I. I just didn't know yet how much there was to lose, or how soon I would be standing in front of all of it. I did not see the morning the empire ended. Sarah pieced it together for me later, on the deck of a ship neither of us yet knew we would share, and even her steady voice went thin telling it. It began with a loyal old marquis. He came striding into the gilded audience hall while the storm gathered gray behind the tall windows, a lion-maned warrior who had outlived 3 wars, and he demanded to see the queen. He wanted the princess freed. He had nobles and mages at his back, and for one breath, the old order still seemed to hold. Then, Victor stepped out from behind the throne. He said he spoke for the crown now. He mocked the old man's loyalty as a quaint, useless thing, the way you might pity a dog for guarding an empty house. Beatrice, the queen, sat hollow-eyed beneath a new crown and gave him an ancient ring without being asked. The late king's ring, Sarah said, a thing that channeled more mana than any one mage was ever meant to hold. And below the palace, Victor had cracked open something older still, an engine sealed for 1,000 years that poured out power without end. The moment Sarah described it, I knew what that power cost. I had felt the smaller version of it in the dead gardens of the capital. The engine did not make mana from nothing. It drank it out of the soil and the rivers and the green breathing world, abundance at the top and famine everywhere beneath. The Marquis reached for his sword. He never drew it. Where the proud old warrior had stood there was only a figure of cold gold, gleaming and silent, one arm half raised forever. 2 of his retainers had become statues of dull bronze. An old scribe who cried out was stilled the same way. Victor sat down on the throne of the 1,000-year empire and called it his. He said the world belonged to magic now, and that he was magic. Outside, a black cloud closed over the capital, and the thunder began. High in the dead dragon tower, in the cold stone room where they had been kept, Sarah was already moving. Diana did not weep, and she did not freeze. The princess traded the court gown for hunting leathers, calm as a woman dressing for a long ride. Sarah told me she had never respected anyone more than in that quiet minute. There was a third person in the room, a young woman with black cat's ears flat against her hair and a long tail curled tight to her leg, flinching at every sound. Mia. Diana had found her cast-off and ill-used under Duke Aldrich's roof and had simply taken her in, the way you pick up something precious that someone else has thrown in the gutter. You mean to bring her? Sarah said it flat, not quite a question. Diana didn't look up from the buckle she was fastening. Of course she's coming, and you. All of us, or none of us. A folded note slid under the door. Walter's hand, the old butler with his silver hair and his pressed black coat, dangerous in ways his bow never showed. The words were short. Victor held the throne. The city was tearing itself apart. At dusk, a ship would be waiting in the canals, and friends with it. Sarah read it twice. You'd have us run, she said, and leave the loyal mages to die fighting. I'd have us live, so there's someone left worth fighting for. Diana held out a hand. After a long moment, the cat-eared young woman took it. They went down through the bones of the tower, an old lift shaft that dropped them past 1,000 years of stone to a loading dock where the Black Canal lapped at the steps. A ship waited there, sent quietly from the northern lands of a count named Gareth, its hull tiled with the pale rune scales that push a vessel through the water. Walter had cleared the path ahead of them. Soldiers handed the princess aboard. For a moment, it almost worked. Then, something laughed above them. On a balcony over the dock stood what had been Duke Aldrich. Sarah barely knew him. The The bloated, jeweled glutton from the banquet was gone, swallowed by a thing overgrown with writhing red-black roots that pulsed beneath the skin like a second set of veins. He crooned the princess's name down at them, slow and wet and delighted, asking where she thought she was going. The ropes came off, the rune scales caught. The ship slid out into the dark water with that laughter rolling after it. Now I can tell you what I saw with my own eyes. Holly and I left the inn that same afternoon. The owners were packing too. Even their hidden little kitchen across the canal bridge wasn't safe anymore. The aunt pressed bread on us and made us promise to mind ourselves. And then we were out in it. The city had gone mad. Smoke, running feet. A black cloud crowned the palace, lit from inside by lightning that never seemed to land, and the air beneath it pressed on my chest like a held breath. Holly's ears flattened, and she caught my sleeve. There's a smell, a wrong one. She turned her face up toward the towers. It's coming from up there. Her nose had never once lied to me. We pushed toward the canals, because the canals were the only way out. Everyone in the slums had said so. Shops stood broken open. People carried what they could, and trampled what they couldn't. 3 men stepped into our path where the street narrowed, knives and a club, and the easy grins of people who had decided we were prey. One of them told me to hand over anything worth taking. I looked at the wooden haft of his club, and at the seeds I always keep in my pouch, and I did the small useful thing in front of me. Roots erupted from the dead wood of their weapons. The club, the knife handles, all of it remembered being a tree, and grew fast, twisting up their arms and lashing them to the railing behind them without breaking a single bone. Step aside, I told them, which was funny because they couldn't. Holly stared at me, then at them, then hurried to keep up. I stayed between her and the rest of the street. I still hadn't found a way to mend the old bruises she carried, and that failure sat in me like a stone, but I could at least make sure no one added to them. Here our 2 roads ran toward the same point on the water, though I didn't know it yet. While I was binding thugs to a railing, this is what was happening on Sarah's deck. She told me after, and Mia filled in the parts Sarah was too busy surviving to notice. Aldrich came over the water. He cleared the gap between balcony and ship in one impossible leap, far more than any man could jump, and landed without so much as bending his knees. A deckhand who got too close was flung down and did not get up. The thing that had been a duke opened its mouth and spat, and the venom hissed through steel and bit smoking holes in the planks. Sarah borrowed a soldier's sword and met it anyway. Her strike landed clean and deep, and then sealed shut before her eyes, the wound knitting closed under a crust of red-black scab. That was when she understood what Walter had been trying to tell her. The witch Margaret had healed the Duke. From the shore, she was said to have called it a kindness, that she had taken away his pain, and if the cure had run a touch strong, well, now his body was happy and his mind was paradise. What she had actually made was a thing that could not die the ordinary way, and had to pull the life out of others to keep itself whole. An arm stretched too long and caught Sarah, lifting her clean off her feet and pinning her hard against the mast. It gloated that it would drink her dry. It didn't get the chance. Mia came off a soldier's shoulders like a thrown blade. A heel cracked down on the monster's head. Claws raked across its face, and the grip broke. Sarah dropped to the deck, free, dragging in air. The cat-eared young woman planted herself between the knight and the monster and bared her teeth. She had suffered under this creature back when it still wore a man's face, and she was finished being afraid of it. Sarah got up. For a moment, she just looked at the one who had saved her. Then she went down on one knee, sword laid across her arm, and offered Mia a place at her side, her apprentice, her knight, her friend. Mia's ears came up for the first time. "Took you long enough," she muttered, which Sarah said was a yes. By the time Holly and I reached the canal, the light was going gold at the edges as the storm finally broke and pulled back. We couldn't get on anything. I offered to work our passage, haul cargo, crew the lines, whatever they needed, and one captain after another took a single look at Holly's ears and waved us off. The world was ending, and they still cared about that. Holly tugged my sleeve. Her nose was working again, and her face had gone strange. "That bad smell. It's here." She looked up at me, troubled. "But there's another one underneath it. It smells like you, Adrian. Almost exactly like you." I followed where she was pointing. Out on the water, a cargo ship was sliding past, and on its deck, a woman with blue hair tied high was trading blows with a black, many-armed monster. I knew the way she moved before I could make out her face. 9 years fell away in a heartbeat. A dead cedar piling rotted at the end of the pier, gray and soft with age. I put my hand against it and gave it back the spring it had forgotten. It came up out of the water like something waking, a whole tree in a few seconds, lifting Holly and me with it, and I bent the growth at the top so it swept the monster off its feet just as we dropped onto the deck. An old fisherman on the bank fell flat on his backside. Somewhere a soldier was shouting that it was him. That one, the exiled D rank, the worthless one. I landed badly, which is to say, I landed at all. Funny how a boat shows up right when you need one, I said, getting to my feet. Sarah didn't even look surprised. She looked like she'd been expecting me for 9 years, and I was finally, irritatingly, on time. Welcome to hell. She put her back to mine, the way she had when we were children playing at war. I've been waiting for you, Adrian. A beat. And then the dry edge I had missed for years. Where on earth did you pick up the dog-eared one? Long story. They always are with you. Holly pressed close to my side, shaking at the reek of the thing. Is that a friend? She asked, meaning Sarah. And then, sniffing, you two smell the same. Cover. Behind the crates. Now, she went. The scar across Sarah's cheek caught the last of the light. Years ago, I had promised I'd find a way to take those marks from her, and I still hadn't managed it. But that was a debt for a quieter day. Right then, there was only one thing I wanted, simple and whole, to stand at her side and get every living soul on this ship through the night. The monster gathered itself and named what it was through a ruined mouth. Aldrich, it said, the Duke, and it wanted the princess's life. Near the rail, there was a trembling young mage with sandy hair and knocking knees, sent up from below by the princess. Hugo, an old acquaintance from my court days, looking like he wanted to be anywhere else in the world. I put my hands flat on the deck. Teak is stubborn wood, hard and slow, but it had been a forest once, and it remembered. Shoots burst up around the creature's limbs, grasping and winding, pinning 6 arms and a bulk that should not have been able to move at all. For one breath, we had it. Then it spat. The venom poured down, the green shoots blackened and sagged, and the Duke tore free with a sound like wet timber splitting. We fell back behind the cargo, Sarah swearing under her breath, me already thinking. Behind the cargo, in the narrow dark between the crates, Holly nearly trod on someone. Mia was already there, crouched and bristling. The two of them stared at each other, dog ears and cat ears, both marked by the same kind of hard road, and something in each of them recognized something in the other. Holly's tail gave one uncertain wag. Mia rolled her eyes and made room. He yours? Mia muttered, jerking her chin toward the deck where I stood. He saved me, Holly whispered. Yeah. Mia's gaze flicked to Sarah. Mine too, sort of. In the gap between the crates, they pieced the rest of it together from what the soldiers were shouting. That Victor had seized the throne, that the princess they were guarding had run for the northern lands, that the whole bright world they had grown up under had come down in a single afternoon. Out on the open deck, Sarah was looking at the monster with something I didn't expect, hesitation. He was a man once, a noble. I keep seeing it. Her knuckles had gone white on the borrowed sword. He stopped being that a while ago, I said. What's blunting your blade isn't honor. It's a curse, an A-rank witch's work. Then how do we put it down? I couldn't unmake another mage's magic, but I didn't need to. I dug the pouch out of my belt, a clotting herb I always carried, the kind that closes a wound by knitting it shut. When you hit it, drive this in, I told her. Don't ask why, just trust me. She almost smiled. I always do. That's the problem. An old soldier came pounding across the deck and threw something to her, a heavy spiked morning star, dark with age. It came from the princess, he gasped, her own late father's weapon, sent up with her thanks and her order to end the thing. Sarah caught it out of the air, and her hesitation went with the catch. She moved. The morning star came down, and the monster folded under it, and in the same motion, she drove the pouch deep into the broken place. It's in, she shouted. That was all I needed. I reached for the herb the way I had reached for the cedar and the teak, and I told it to grow. It grew inside him. The little herb that closed cuts ran wild through the whole corrupted bulk, clotting, hardening, stilling. The thing that could not be cut and could not be drained went stiff from the inside out, turned gray, and cracked. A heartbeat later, there was nothing on the deck but dust and a settling quiet. It did not rise again. For a moment, no one moved. Then the deck erupted, sailors and soldiers and the trembling mage, all of them roaring, because the man who had just ended what swords couldn't was the worthless D-rank the court had thrown away. Sarah turned to me, breathing hard, and held up a fist. I bumped it with mine. With you along, she said, this voyage might actually be fun. Behind the crates, 2 sets of ears peeked out, and Holly was grinning. The ship found the current and swung its nose north, toward Gareth's lands and whatever waited past them, carrying all of us, the discarded, every single one, away from a golden city that had finally eaten itself alive. The morning after the battle, the river carried us north, and nobody was trying to kill us. That alone felt strange enough to be suspicious. Sarah and I worked the deck with the sailors, scrubbing away the last marks of the thing we had put down, and behind us, the gilded capital shrank into a smudge of black smoke and violet light on the horizon. I looked back at it exactly once, and then I stopped. Holly came to me with a coconut held in both hands, ears up, careful, like she was bringing a king his crown. "Adrian, here, for you." I patted her head and she leaned into it. Mia tried her own, made a face, and informed me with great dignity that it tasted like grass. I saved the fibers without quite knowing why. Old habit. A useful thing is a useful thing. Somewhere on that river, I noticed I had stopped speaking like a courtier. At the palace, I had talked stiff as a fence post, every word measured for someone who was waiting to use it against me. Out here, with people who actually seemed to like me, the real voice came back on its own. I said as much to Sarah. She just grinned and told me I finally sounded human again. Then Diana came up from below, and the deck went quiet the way it does when someone gracious walks in. She thanked the crew, each of them, and then she turned to me and asked whether I would come north with them and join her road. I started to say a weak mage wouldn't be much use, and Sarah's elbow found my ribs. Diana only smiled and reminded me she had seen the palace garden bloom under my hands when the whole court had called it dead. So I told her the truth. "I don't know how much use I'll be," I said, "but I'll come." A green-haired man bounded over, wounded that I'd forgotten him. Hugo, a lightning mage from an old guild hunt, the one who had been too scared to throw a single spell that day. Diana raised a fist and named us companions. No titles, no formalities, all of us on the same road, and the others echoed it down the deck. For a man who had been handed one coin and told to disappear, being wanted was a strange and heavy thing to carry. I did not see what happened in the Capitol behind us. No one who stood in those rooms lived to tell me, but the shape of it reached me later, piece by piece, and this is how I have come to understand it. The queen sat on a throne of gold in a palace that was turning to gold around her, and she had stopped seeing the world at all. Her last loyal minister knelt before her and begged her to look. The famine, the riots, the noble houses burning. He told her the army could not hold, and the capital itself would fall. She only asked dreamily what it was the people wanted, and then ordered the rebels put to death. When the minister pushed harder, the man behind the throne stepped forward. Victor. A breath of black smoke crossed the floor, and the protest simply ended. The minister did not speak again. The queen did not even turn her head. She said she hated the red of blood. She said she wished the whole world were gold instead, clean and quiet and perfect. And Victor, ever obliging, gave her exactly what she asked for. He turned her, gown, crown, the cold blue of her eyes, all of it, to solid, lifeless gold, until the woman who had prized metal above every living thing was nothing but a statue on her own throne. The regime that had loved gold more than people was finally, perfectly, made of it. I think that was its epitaph. And far beneath her golden bones, Victor was already gathering the last mages of the empire for something none of them understood. Victor held the old king's seal ring now, and with it, he opened doors that had been shut for 1,000 years. He let a rumor run loose that ancient treasure waited in the lowest sealed floors, and the mages of the empire went down into the dark after it, 100 and more, greedy and laughing all the way down. They found a chamber ringed with great crystal pillars. One of them reached his hand into the stone, and the trap closed around all of them at once. The chamber had been built to unmake, to take living magic and pull it apart into raw, shining power. They cried out for Victor to help them. He watched, because spending them was the entire point. When it was done, there were no bodies left behind, only light, gathered up and waiting to be used. He poured all of it into the thing he had woken beneath the world, an ancient engine the old empire had buried long ago, a machine that drank life and gave back ruin. He believed it would make him a god. He believed the rotten old world had to be unmade, so he could raise a better one with himself at its center. Then he fired it. What the engine made was not magic the way I had ever known magic. A light bloomed where the capital had been, white and enormous, swelling until it was several times the size of the setting sun. It did not flare and die like fire. It collapsed inward and spread, a dome of blue-white spilling across the whole far edge of the world. And when it faded, there was nothing left standing but a single crystal tower, taller than mountains, growing straight out of the wound in the land. Most of the continent was simply gone. Victor stood in that tower and called himself a god. The tower answered him, but not the way he wanted. Two figures woke inside it, the ancients. They had slept 1,000 years, and they were not human, and the world had belonged to them long before any empire of men had a name. He threw everything he had at them, every spell down to the last and greatest one in him. It was like throwing rain at the sea. Their very bodies were woven of magic, and they unmade his the instant it touched them. One looked at him the way you look at an insect that has wandered indoors. The other, bored of his boasting, turned his clever tongue into a flower, so the man who had talked his way onto a throne could not say one more word. they did not hate him. I think that was the worst of it for him. They simply did not care. They had woken only to leave, to abandon a spent, dying world, and cross the dark to a young blue star where they would begin again. The eldest of them called him filth, opened a hole in the floor, and dropped him out onto the dead ground like sweepings off a step. Then the tower rose. It lifted into the sky like a comet going the wrong way, carrying them and the seeds of a whole new world with it. And then it was gone. And Victor was not dead. That is the part that mattered, though none of us knew it for a long time. Stripped of his power, half mad, alone on a continent of ash, he crawled, and his hand closed on a single shard of the ancient's crystal where it had fallen beside him. One splinter of the thing that had ended the world. He kept it. He held on. What that light truly was, whether the world had been destroyed at all or only moved somewhere I could not follow, I would not understand until much, much later. None of that had reached us yet. 2 days out from the river mouth, we ran north along the coast, under a sky that had begun to go wrong. Dark clouds stacked over the continent behind us, threaded with the same violet light I'd seen above the capital, and the air carried a pressure like the held breath before a scream. Holly felt it worse than any of us. She pressed against me and said she could hear something from the sky, like screaming, very far away. I kept an arm around her and told her I had her. Mia took one look at those clouds and bolted below deck to hide. I did not blame her. Then the lookout called a sail off the port side, fast, low, marked with a skull. Pirates, running us down because our ship flew no colors worth fearing. Sarah came up armored, her soldiers behind her, and set the line without a flicker of doubt. Hugo, green in the face and greener with nerves, kept insisting his lightning had too wide a blast to use safely on a crowded deck, right up until the raiders drew close enough to jeer at us. Then, something in him simply snapped. He planted his feet, traced his circle in the air, and let go. The bolt that came down split the pirate ship clean in two, and the sea swallowed both halves before the echo had faded. In the ringing quiet after, Hugo looked faintly ill at what he had done, and I caught myself very glad that all that power had been on our side in the last fight, and not pointed at us. By sunset, the sea had gone flat, and still, in a way, the sea is never still. Sarah stood beside me at the rail and told me she was an optimist, that we'd outrun worse than a little weather. I wanted very badly to believe her. Then the west lit up. A light bloomed on the far horizon, white and impossibly large. I felt it in my chest before my mind could argue. A wrongness so vast it had no name I could give it. Whatever was happening over there, an entire world was happening to it at once. Then the sea answered. The water ahead of us began to rise, and it kept rising. A black wall taller than any cliff I had ever stood beneath, marching straight down on our small ship. Orders flew the length of the deck. Turn the bow into it, full thrust, all hands brace. We had seconds, and the wall kept climbing. Walter caught us at the companionway. His calm finally cracked. Her Highness had cried out in pain, he said, and he pointed us down to her cabin. We found Diana on the floor with both hands pressed over her ears, weeping. She could feel them, she told us. Countless lives, all across the world, going out at once like candles in a wind. Everyone was vanishing. The world was ending. As she said it, the old heirloom ring on her finger cracked and broke apart into pieces. Sarah dropped down beside her and got an arm around her shoulders. "It's all right," she said. "I've got you." And in that swinging lantern light, counting the people crowded into the little cabin, I realized two of us were not there. Holly, Mia. My whole body went cold. I went down into the hold against the rising water. Cold black sea was already pouring through the seams of the hull, past my knees, past my waist, the whole ship groaning as the great wave heaved it over onto its side. Loose cargo slid and cracked somewhere in the dark. I called their names until my throat tore. I found them wedged behind a pillar. Holly, with both arms wrapped around Mia, the two of them shaking. Holly looked up at me, like she could not believe I had come down here for them at all, like she was still waiting to learn I had come for someone who mattered more. "Adrian," I took her face in my hands. "There's no question about it," I told her. "You're family now, both of you. I will never leave you behind." Mia grabbed a fistful of my sleeve and did not let go. Then the hull cracked, a long seam tearing down the timbers, the sea shouldering in through the gap. I put both hands flat on the dead wood and called it back. Wilt recollection. The gift they had laughed at me for, the worthless one. I poured all of it into the broken hull, and the old dead timber woke under my palms and grew. Green ran through the grain. The wood swelled and knit and fused, seam to seam, thicker and stronger than it had ever been new, until the sea was shut out and the terrible groaning stopped. I got them up the ladder ahead of me, one hand on each, and did not look back at the water. Somehow the ship climbed that wall of water and came down the far side of it, and the hull I had reknit held where it should have shattered to splinters. The storm still screamed around us, the rain coming sideways, but we were afloat, all of us, every face I had come to need accounted for on that pitching deck. Then Diana began to sing, pale and exhausted, still hearing the death of a world in her ears. She lifted her voice up over the wind, and it steadied us, sailor and soldier and beast-eared friend alike, the way one lit window steadies a man lost in the dark. I stood with Holly tucked under one arm and Mia under the other, Sarah at my shoulder, the burn scars on her cheek lit pale by the lightning, a debt I still meant to pay her on some quieter day than this one. I let the song move through me and held on to what I had. I did not yet know what had happened behind us. I did not know the world we had grown up in was already gone, or that one ember of the man who had ended it was still alive out on the ash, clutching a shard of crystal and waiting for the strength to stand. I only knew this much. The people I had gathered were breathing, and I had not let go of a single one of them. The world had ended, and we were still here. I woke to the smell of wet timber and to someone breathing very carefully beside me, the way you breathe near someone you think might break. Holly had not moved all night. Her ears lay flat against her hair, and there were bruises down one arm from the storm, dark as plums. She saw my eyes open and leaned close. "Adrian, where does it hurt?" "Everywhere," I said, which means I'm alive. I tried to sit up, and the deck tilted like it wanted me back down. She pressed a hand to my shoulder. "This is nothing. Lie still. You're covered in bruises too. I don't see you complaining." That got me the smallest huff of a laugh, which was all I had wanted. Then boots on the boards, and Sarah came down the ladder, took one look at me half risen, and hauled me the rest of the way up by the arm, never gentle. "On your feet, plant man. Hope's better than no hope. Remember that." My legs held, barely. The magic I had poured into the hull had scraped me down to the very bottom of myself, the way a field looks after a hard harvest, turned over and emptied. But I was standing, and the ship was still under us. I would take it. Up top, the sea had gone calm, too calm, flat and gray and patient, like water that had already done its worst and knew it. Walter stood at the rail, unruffled as ever, and called us together. "Everyone, Her Highness wishes to speak." Diana looked like she had not slept in days, but she thanked us each by name. Then she told us what the crystal communicators had stopped carrying in the night. The gilded capital was gone. The way she pieced it together, Victor had killed the queen, turned her last loyal guards to gold, and driven a host into a sealed vault beneath the city. Something there had detonated. The blast that raised our tsunami had been the capital dying. She lifted her hand. The heart ring she always wore, the one that could feel the massed weight of a whole people, had shattered in the dark. "All at once," she said. She did not have to finish the thought. We did the arithmetic and wished we had not. Hugo said it for everyone, voice cracking. "Why? Why are we the ones still alive?" Nobody answered him. I looked at Holly, at Mia gripping the rail with her ears pinned back, at the hard set of Sarah's scarred face against the wind, and something in me went very quiet and very certain. What I wanted now was small, somewhere my family could stop running, a roof, a door that locked, ground I could put my hands into. I had spent my whole life being told my gift was worthless. If it could buy them that, it would have been worth every bitter year of believing them. Land came up before noon, a small southern port, one pier, and a row of fishing sheds. Someone on the bow cheered. Then they stopped, because the people on the docks were not moving. They stood where the light had caught them. Every one of them turned to white salt, pale as bone, frozen mid-step, mid-turn, mid-wave. When the captain sent a boat in and a sailor touched the nearest of them, the arm crumbled to powder and sifted away on the breeze, soft as flour. No struggle, no mark, just people, and then quiet white shapes where people had been. Holly pressed her face into my sleeve, and I let her. I made myself think instead of feel, the only way I knew to stay upright. The same light that took the capital had reached this far south, but our ship had lived. "My guess is the wave saved us," I said. "The tsunami threw up a wall of water between us and that light. It cut the worst of it." Diana said nothing. She was looking at the white flecks freckling our own outer planks, where the very edge of it had brushed even us. The captain had seen enough. He gave the order in a flat, tired voice, "No good here, nothing living," and set our course north for the last harbor that might still have a pulse, Saltport in the North March. I did not meet the lord of that land until later, but I came to know how the same news had reached him hours ahead of us and what kind of man it found. His name was Gareth, a frontier count, dark hair tied back, perpetual stubble, the easy slouch of a man who had long stopped performing his rank. Years back, the story went, he had been a duke with a claim near the throne and had traded all of it for a woman beneath his station who had died of illness anyway. He had buried the duke with her and kept the frontier. His administrator was a sharp, silver-haired woman named Evelyn, spectacles always sliding down her nose, ledger always open. He was grumbling at her for more wine off the stores when she told him, plainly, that the empire was simply gone. The whole heart of the continent, silent overnight. The county next door, erased. He took it the way I would learn he took everything. A long breath, and then the next problem. He had a private reason to care about a ship like ours. The princess who had fled to his frontier to escape a marriage she never agreed to was the daughter of the king he had once served and sworn to protect. She was standing on our deck that very hour. He just did not know it. Then a young soldier came in at a run with worse news. A horde, 200 strong, was migrating south out of the hills, straight for Saltport. Most of his fighting men were away at the border pulling survivors from rubble. He had a skeleton guard and a handful of hunters. Evelyn told him a lord riding out himself was foolish. He agreed, and did it anyway, because that was exactly the kind of fool he was. Saltport rose out of the bay near sundown, and for one clean breath, it was everything we had hoped for. A real harbor, a lighthouse, smoke from chimneys, people on the quay. Mia was the first to shout it. A port! Look, it's alive! The harbor's alive! Then we drew close enough to see why those people were running. The waterfront was under attack. Orcs and goblins poured along the stone, big club-swinging shapes and smaller darting ones, and a thin line of townsfolk was breaking apart in front of them. Holly's ears went flat, and her hand closed on my arm. That harbor? It smells scary? Diana did not hesitate. She came up the deck, already pulling on her gloves and a light cuirass, and her voice cut clean over the noise. She had reached Count Gareth through the crystal, she told us. He was already riding for the docks with what men he had. We would land and hold the harbor until he came. Walter laid out the rest in a few flat sentences. Sarah on the front, 6 fighters with her, 2 mages in support, and everyone else pulling the fallen from the water. The pier was packed end to end with monsters, and we needed it clear to land. Hugo, we need a path. He went the color of old cheese. I don't have much mana left, but he raised the little wooden wand anyway, and what came off the end of it was anything but little. Lightning fell white and enormous, and when my eyes cleared, the pier was empty and smoking, and ours. He looked faintly sick at his own work. We landed hard. Sarah went first off the gangway, because of course she did, greatsword already swinging, and the lead orc did not get a second step. She had an old grudge with their kind. I never asked the whole of it, but you could watch her spending it now, in every blow, that scarred jaw set like stone. I worked behind her. I could not trade blows with an orc and live, and I did not have to. I put my palm flat to the planks and called up the only gift I had ever owned. The wooden halves of their clubs and spears woke in their fists, sprouted, threw out roots and green shoots, and locked tight. A monster staring at the branch growing out of its own weapon is a monster the soldiers can finish. I tied them down. The soldiers cleaned up behind me. Don't worry, I told the nearest sailor. I'll just make sure everyone lands safe. We pushed toward the lighthouse, where the townsfolk had gone to ground. A fresh wave of orcs met us in the warehouse row, and that was where I started to notice the wrongness of it. Monsters do not fight like soldiers. They swarm and break and chase whatever runs. These did not. They held a line. When one fell, another stepped into the gap as if it had been told to. A horde should not move like a hand with fingers. Sarah, they're too organized. Something's steering them. She did not slow her swing. Then find it and break it. I let my eyes climb off the fight and go looking. And there, on the flat roof of the tallest warehouse, where no townsperson and no monster had any reason to be, stood a single still figure in a gray hood. Watching the battle, the way a man watches a game board, he is winning, not fleeing, weighing. That was the hand behind all of it. I was sure of it. Hugo, I caught his sleeve. Can you throw lightning at that roof? Week's fine. I just need him off it. I've got maybe a sliver left, he said. I couldn't drop a single orc with what's in me, but he turned and took aim. First, a problem closer to hand. A knot of orcs surged at Sarah's flank. I dropped to one knee and pushed everything I had left into the seams of the cobbles, and a thicket tore up between her and them, fast as a thrown net, branches thick as my arm. It bought her half a second. Her morning star did the rest, and the soldiers closed the gap. Then Hugo's bolt went up. It clipped the warehouse chimney, blew brick and sparks across the roofline, and the gray figure came off the edge into open air. I was already moving. I slammed my palm against a pillar at the warehouse foot and woke it. Dead timber remembering how to be a tree, and branches whipped out, caught the falling shape mid-fall, and folded around it like a cupped hand before it could strike the stones. And every monster in the harbor stopped at once, heads turning nowhere, weapons drooping, the whole coordinated machine of them going slack in a single breath, like a puppeteer's strings cut all together. Just as I thought, I murmured, break his focus, and he can't hold their minds. We brought him down out of the branches. Sarah had her morning star up before his feet touched the ground, and when the hood fell back, she nearly used it. It was not a man. The skin was a deep ashen gray, the hair silver as frost, the ears long and pointed, and the eyes, open for just a moment, were red and round, strange as two small moons. A dark elf. I had only heard of them in old stories, the failed first drafts the ancients made before the true high elves, beings who could reach into a monster's mind and steer it like a limb. Sarah leaned in, all teeth. Bold, for a prisoner. Want me to crack that skull open? He met it with one thin thread of defiance. So what if he was the one behind it all? And then the defiance ran out of him like water out of a cracked jug. Whatever he had spent holding 200 minds had emptied him the way the hull had emptied me. His eyes rolled back, and he went limp in the branches, out cold. He's done. I put a hand on Sarah's arm. Look at him. He's run as dry as Hugo. We keep him alive. She did not like it. She stepped back anyway. That was when the cavalry came down the harbor road. Count Gareth rode at the head of them, and he took in the smoking docks, the scattering monsters, and our ragged company in one long sweep, then laughed out loud, the way only a man who had braced for far worse can laugh. Fine work, all of us, he said. We had his thanks, and not one soul had been lost on his docks. The harbor heard it, and the cheering started, ragged at first and then full-throated, from people who had been running for their lives an hour before. He swung down and clasped Diana's hands, the daughter of his old king, safe on his shore at last. Then he looked at the rest of us, the boatload of the world's leftovers, and welcomed every last one of us into the North March as if we were worth something. Standing there, Holly's shoulder under my hand, and Sarah at my side, and a sleeping dark elf tangled in branches I had grown. I let myself think it just once. Maybe this was the door that locked. I did not watch the thing in the salt desert happen. What I know of it came to me later, in pieces, the way you learn about a fire from the smell that lingers in a room. But I know it now, and there are nights I wish I did not. Where the gilded capital had stood, there was only salt, a flat white waste under a sun gone red as a wound, and not a breath of wind to stir it. And in all that nothing, 3 people were still alive who had no business being alive. Victor was one of them, beaten down to a husk, hollow-eyed. The genius who had thrown me away, now on his knees in the powder. His 2 surviving companions stood over him, the witch and the war mage who had laughed the day they cast me out, and they blamed him for all of it. The witch shook him and raved about a wine shop that no longer existed. The war mage kicked him and called him a worthless wreck. He let them rage. He had something in his fist they had not noticed, a shard of crystal, palm-sized, taken from the palace of the ancients before they flung him out of it. And while the witch was still screaming about her wine, he reached up and pressed the shard to her. I will tell it plainly, because the plain telling is bad enough. The shard drank her life, her magic, all of it pulled out in a single breath. And where she had stood there was nothing but a smear of pale dust the dead air did not bother to carry away. The war mage understood half a second too late. He lunged. He never reached Victor. He went the same way she had, dust on salt, under a red sun. And Victor knelt there alone, and at last understood what he was holding. The crystal was a piece of the ancient's palace, and that palace ran on life the way a body runs on blood, endless, circulating. The shard was the needle. Press it to anything that lived, and it would pull that living across the gap and into him. He had not been saved. He had been handed away to keep paying to stay alive, in a coin that had to be torn out of someone else first. He should have been horrified. Instead, I am told he laughed. A mark surfaced on his brow as the stolen life poured in, a pale brand in the shape of an X, like a thing crossing itself off the list of what gets to be called a man. He named himself transcended, beyond rank, beyond any scale that had ever measured a mage, and he was not wrong. He had become something new, But here is the part he was too drunk to weigh, the part that came to matter most to all of us later. The crystal did not make life, it only moved it. It kept him breathing only so long as there was something near enough to drain, and the instant there wasn't, the hunger would turn on him. He had made himself into a thing that had to keep killing simply to keep standing, an appetite wearing a man's face, alone on a plain of salt, with nothing left to eat, and a whole living shore of survivors to the north. That is the part I wish I did not know. All of that reached me much later. The morning it was actually happening, I was somewhere far kinder and far stranger than a desert of salt. They had put the dark elf in a holding room under Gareth's castle. Iron bars and old runes cut deep into the stone that smothered a captive's magic so he could not reach for it. By the time I came down the stairs, Sarah and Evelyn already had him cornered. Sarah was doing what Sarah does, standing over him, blunt as a hammer, telling him he had cost the harbor plenty and could start paying it back with answers. Evelyn stood at the little table with her notes, cool and exact, saying only that they needed it confirmed. And the dark elf, Eric, though I did not have the name yet, was folded into the far corner, knees drawn up, ashen gray, silver hair fallen across red eyes, shaking. That was what stopped me in the doorway. Not the bars, the shaking. Sarah. I crossed the room and laid a hand on her arm. That's enough. She did not turn. He steered a whole horde into a town full of people. I know what he did. I waited until she finally looked at me. Look at him, though. That isn't defiance. That's a creature that's terrified out of its mind. So she looked. To her credit, she really looked, and after a moment, her shoulders came down half an inch. Fine, she told me, low. My way then. She stepped back and folded her arms, and the whole little room seemed to let out a breath it had been holding. I crouched down to his level, the first thing nobody in that room had done. I did not ask what he was. I did not ask why he had attacked. I asked his name. It took him a long moment to believe the question was real. Then he gave it, barely above a whisper, Eric. I asked how old he was. He did not know the year, so I worked it backward from the old reckoning he counted by, a small circle of figures in the dust. The number I came to made no sense, so I checked it twice. Over 900 years. He had been made, he said, 9 centuries ago, and the word made sat down wrong in my chest and stayed there. He told the rest of it quietly, like a man who had stopped expecting to be believed. He had woken in the dark, in a ruin somewhere in the northern forest. His companions had been right there beside him, every one of them long dead, dried out and gone to nothing. He had wandered out into a world that had ended without him, and met monsters who spoke to him mind to mind and told him exactly that. There was no food left in the forest. The monsters had pointed him toward the human town. He was starving, so he went. Please. His voice cracked clean in half on the word. I was only hungry. The door opened then, and it was the finest timing anyone has ever had. Holly came in careful, both hands wrapped around a heavy pot, Mia a step behind steadying the lid, and the cold room filled with the smell of lamb and rosemary. Adrian, I brought food, Holly said. Mia lifted the lid like she was unveiling a crown. It's lamb stew. I ladled a bowl and held it out to Eric. Food for the truth, I told him, and the truth he had already given me. So the food was his, and no longer a bargain. He stared at the bowl like it might bite him. Then he took it in both shaking hands and ate like it was the first warm thing he had touched in 900 years, which I suppose it was. The north wind and the sun, I said to Sarah. You know the story. The wind tried to tear the coat off the traveler and only made him clutch it tighter. The sun just shone, and the man took the coat off himself. I had meant it about Eric, but by then I meant it about all of us. I did not want to break this creature open to get at what was inside him. I wanted to hand him a bowl and a name and a wall to put his back against and let him decide for himself whether we were worth talking to. You catch more that way. You catch the whole person instead of only the parts that scream. Sarah did not argue. She watched him eat, and something in her face that had been a drawn blade went quiet and sheathed itself. What they chose to do with Eric after that, I heard about secondhand. The way I heard about most things in that castle then. Evelyn had not let it rest at a bowl of stew. She had the North March's old lore master lay a truth reading over every word Eric had given us, and every word held. Slept in a forest ruin, woke alone, all of it true. She had also, I found out later, quietly run the same checks on the rest of us, me, Hugo, Sarah, Holly, and Mia, and decided we were exactly what we looked like, loyal, worth keeping. So she set the choice in front of Gareth plainly. They held a creature who could speak to monsters and turn them, a young king of beasts. They could put him to death as the ringleader who had brought an attack down on their harbor, or they could try to make him one of their own. Gareth did not take long. Talent like that, he said, was an asset he could not afford to throw away. They would keep Eric alive and win him over, and they would test him first. Send him north into the monster-choked forest that had been raiding the North March for years, and see whether he could quiet it. Send me along with him, since I had already gotten further with him than Fear had. And send a guard company too, 100 strong, in case the gentle road failed. If it did, Evelyn said, they would end it then. But she said it like a woman who already suspected it would never come to that. The plan was barely settled when Diana let herself in. Gareth was nursing his head that morning. He had found the bottom of a bottle the night before, the way he did when the news from the wider world piled up too heavy. Diana took one look at him and gently took him to task. Go easy, she told him. Her own father had wrecked his health the very same way, and she had no wish to watch that twice. Gareth grumbled that a scolding stung worse coming from a princess, but he set the cup down. Then she heard the plan and surprised everyone in the room. I'm coming too, she said. Evelyn started to object. It was a dangerous mission, no place for the woman they had all just sworn to protect. Diana would not be moved. Eric was not a monster, she said. Eric was only lonely. She had seen it already. Inside of a single day, he had made friends with Holly and Mia, two souls the old world had thrown out the same way it had thrown out him. A lonely thing does not need a cage, she said. It needs somewhere to belong, and she meant to give him one. A day later, we gathered in the courtyard to ride north. Eric stood among us in the cold dawn, out of the cell at last, blinking up at a sky he had not been allowed to look at in days. Someone had given him a clean cloak, and Holly was already at his elbow, chattering at him about the forest he had crawled out of. Mia kept one wary eye on him out of old habit, and the other on the kitchens, in case there was more stew. Diana checked her horse, Sarah checked her sword, and then, when she thought I was not watching, checked that Eric had been fed. I stood there and let myself feel how strange it all was. We had taken the creature who brought a horde down on a town full of living people, and instead of breaking him for it, we had fed him, named him, and were about to hand him a real chance to belong to something. And far to the south, across a dead sea, I did not yet know was dead, a man who had once held everything was kneeling alone on a plain of salt, teaching himself to go on living by tearing the life out of whatever he could reach. I did not know about Victor yet, but I think some part of me already understood the shape of the choice in front of us all. There are two things a person can do with a broken world and the broken people left standing in it. You can drain them dry to keep yourself upright, or you can grow something out of the ruin and pull up a chair and ask them to sit down and eat. I knew which one I was. I was about to spend a long time proving it. The North March did not just take us in, it gave us somewhere to set our things down. In the days after the South fell, the Count found a place for each of us. Sarah stayed Diana's sworn knight. Mia became an apprentice attendant. I was handed a castle mage's post, and Holly worked mornings in the kitchens. Even Hugo got swept into the army, weeping the whole way. Nobody lets a rare lightning mage cry his way out of a war. Holly and I were given a narrow house behind the castle, 2 floors, old and crooked, with a small yard. I tried to clean it and mostly move the dust from one corner to another. You're making it worse, Holly said, watching from the stairs. I'm establishing a baseline. She came down, took the rag from my hand, and in 10 minutes, the room looked like somewhere people lived. You'll make someone a fine partner someday, I said. Her ears went flat and her face went the color of a ripe plum, and she scrubbed an already clean table so she would not have to answer. She had told me once that where she came from, the rule was simple. If she did not work, she did not eat. She had said it the way you report the weather. So I let her have the rag and the clean room, because a person who has only ever earned their keep needs first to learn she gets to keep it. The yard had a plum tree in it that was mostly dead, gray bark, half its branches snapped, not a single leaf. The soil here was tired in a way I kept noticing everywhere since the South fell. Thin, hungry, as if the ground had stopped believing in spring. I knelt and put my hands in the cold dirt around the roots. People had called my magic worthless for years, but a dead thing leaning back toward the sun is not nothing. I let the magic go down through my fingers, slow. The gray bark darkened. A green shoot pushed from a snapped branch like a held breath let go. Leaves unrolled. White blossom opened all at once, a soft snowfall going the wrong way, up into being. And then fruit, a scatter of small dark plums heavy enough to bow the new wood. Holly made a sound I had never heard from her, pure, surprised delight. She touched one blossom with a fingertip, then looked at her own hand and at me. Could I ever do that? The question came out small, like she was not allowed to want it. I don't see why not, I said. It isn't strength, it's paying attention. You're better at that than anyone I know. She did not answer. but she did not stop looking at her hand either. We went out for dinner things. Ashford did not look like a town at the edge of the end of the world. Warm bread, cheese and wheels, a dog weaving between the stalls. The farms here still gave, even as the south turned to salt, and the survey maps came back with more of the world crossed off. A second great catastrophe, they were starting to call it, the light, spoken about the way you speak of a storm that has not reached you yet. And here, a woman argued cheerfully about the price of onions. Holly carried the basket and walked close, and somewhere in the warm bread smell, I felt her go quiet. I knew that quiet by now. It was the sound of her wishing. She never said it aloud, but I read it in the way she looked at an ordinary moment too hard, as if to press it flat between the pages of a book. Let this last. Let this last a little longer. I did not tell her it would. I just took the basket onto my own arm and let her have her hands free, and we walked home in the sun while it was still ours to walk in. That night, we cooked together in a kitchen barely big enough for one, fighting a whole wheel of cheese until I guided her hand on the knife. We had just sat down when Holly's ears swiveled toward the window. "Someone's outside," she whispered. I took the lamp to the glass and found two faces pressed flat against it. Sarah, a grown knight of the realm, caught spying on my dinner, with Mia crouched beside her, both guilty as raccoons in a pantry. I opened the door. "You could have knocked. We came to inspect your new life," Sarah said, strolling in like she had been invited weeks ago. Mia was already at the pot. "It's warm in here." From Mia, that counts as poetry. Behind them was Eric, come at Holly's asking, since she had not liked him eating alone while we were warm. 900 years old, and he stood on my doorstep like he was not sure a door was something he was allowed through. I jerked my head at the table. "There's a bowl with your name on it." The word name did something to his face. He came in. We ate too much. Sarah told a story with her mouth full. Mia corrected the details, and Holly laughed, really laughed, head back. And I realized I had never heard her do that before. The careful person I had bought free with a single coin was learning she was allowed to take up space. At the end of it, I did a small thing. I had been turning a bare twig in my pocket all evening, and I woke it. A white gardenia opening in the lamplight. Then another and another, one for each of us. "What's it mean?" Mia asked, sniffing hers. "This kind? It means to bring happiness." I set one beside each bowl. "If we're marching into a forest together tomorrow, we ought to have a flag." Mia held hers up like a banner. "Then, we're the Gardenia Knights." She dared the table to argue. Nobody did. Sarah snorted into her cup. Eric looked at the flower in his gray hands as if it were made of glass. The ride north was set for dawn. Gareth had spared Eric and sent him with us into the strange, quiet forest that bred the monsters raiding our farms. His gift for our key and his last chance to prove he could be trusted. Sarah caught my eye over the laughter, and I saw she carried the same stone in her chest that I did. We had a home now. That was exactly the problem. The more you are given, the more there is to lose. But that was tomorrow's wait, so I let the lamp burn and the flowers stay open. For one more hour, that was ours. Dawn put us in the plaza by the gate, where 2 armored wagons waited, and 6 soldiers checked their gear in the cold. These were not ordinary guards. The Hound Squad, the Count's elite, sent when something in the dark needed answering. Their leader looked our party over, me and Sarah, and 2 young women in travel leather and a hooded figure, and did not hide his doubt. He had expected a war company. He had gotten a household. So I told him the truth. We were not here to fight the forest, but to talk to it. And the fewer blades we brought, the better the odds it stayed a conversation. He gave the shrug of a man handed stranger orders before. Then he noticed the flowers. I had bloomed them fresh that morning, 1 white gardenia for every chest. I pinned mine on, pinned Eric's to his cloak over the heart, and for Holly, I woke a new one and tucked it behind her ear. "Cute little knights," the squad leader said, not unkindly. Mia fixed her flower with a knife already through her belt and gave him a look that suggested cute knights still bite. I decided I liked him. Eric kept his hood up and his ears hidden while we ate at the stalls. To the plaza, he was just another cloaked traveler, not the thing that had once come down on the harbor. The road climbed for 2 hours into pine country, the wagons creaking. The Hound Squad fanned around us like a fence. Once we were under the trees and away from staring eyes, Eric pushed his hood back. Out came the long ears, the silver gray hair, the round red eyes that had frightened a whole town once. Out here, among us, he just looked young and tired and painfully glad to be where he was. He went still suddenly, head tilted. "Anything close?" I asked. No. He listened to something none of us could hear. "I can feel them in the trees all around us, but far off. None of them wants trouble yet." Holly pointed over the rail. "A deer!" Mia's ears pricked. Her Her stomach growled loud enough to hear, and the tension of the road broke into laughing. It was during the laughing that Eric said the thing. He had not ridden with anyone in longer than any of us had been alive. He had woken in a dead forest among friends turned to bone. And for 900 years, the only voices he heard were inside the heads of beasts. Then he said the word we had used at the table the night before. Comrade. His voice cracked clean in half on it. You really mean it, he managed. That we're together. I did not make a speech. I just told him yes. He was a Gardenia knight now, stuck with us, flower and all. He turned his face to the trees so we would not see, but his shoulders gave him away. Where the trees grew too thick for wagons, we went on foot. Diana, who had insisted on coming this far, stayed back with the rear and the horses. We had not gone far when 3 shapes stepped out of the green. Orcs. Young ones by their size, though young for an orc still meant taller than Sarah, and twice as broad. Tusked, gray-green, watching us with flat yellow eyes. Sarah's hand drifted to her hilt. Mia went low. Every soldier behind us went quiet. Eric walked toward them, just walked, unhurried, hands open and empty, and started to talk. Not in any tongue I knew, something lower and rougher, made of throat and chest. The orcs' heads came up. One answered. Eric answered back. Then he turned to us, almost shy, almost proud. They'll take us, he said. They know the way. They've been waiting for someone to come. Sarah just stared at him. You were actually talking to them. Told you he could. In truth, I had half wondered until that moment, and the proof of it sat warm in my chest. The thing we had spared, the thing we had fed. His gift turning 3 monsters into guides. The young orcs fell in around us, oddly delighted, and one kept sneaking glances at Sarah, muttering something Eric declined to translate. They led us to a tree the size of a cathedral, an ancient chestnut whose roots cradled a whole village of huts woven from branch and leaf. Goblins skulked at the edges, picking through scraps, and everywhere, orcs, 100 and more, huge and silent, watching us come. The wrongness reached me before I understood it. These were the raiders our farms feared, and they should have been a wall of muscle. Instead, they were thin, hollow-cheeked. The dug-up roots piled by the doorways were withered and pale, and the great trees' vines that should have fed all this hung gray and dying. They were not a threat lying in wait. They were a people quietly running out of food. Their elder came forward, vast, hung with bone and beaten metal, and the air changed. Holly pressed against my arm. It smells like beasts, she whispered, but it isn't a scary smell. It's a sad one. Mia's eyes stayed up in the branches. Big ones and little ones, she breathed. Watching, everywhere, the elder spoke, and Eric went gray. I did not need the words. I read the shape of it in how the whole village leaned in, hungry and hoping. They were asking plainly whether we were food. Eric tried to answer, and it tore him in two. His old saviors starving before him and his new family at his back. His gift needs a calm mind, and it frayed under all that need. He broke. They're my friends, he choked out, in their tongue, and then in ours, so we would hear it too. Not food, please. They're starving, but they once shared their yams with me. They're kind. They're forest friends. It was the wrong thing to say to people whose own were going hungry. The hope curdled. A growl ran through the village like wind through wheat, and the elder's voice rose over it. Through Eric's shaking translation, I caught it. They were done waiting. They would take what the forest would not give and come down on the human towns to feed. Sarah's sword cleared its sheath a hand's width. The hound squad closed up behind us. One wrong move, and this clearing would become the exact thing I had brought everyone here to prevent. So I stepped forward instead, past Eric, past the soldiers, out into the open ground alone, empty hands and a white flower on my chest, in front of 100 starving monsters. Tell them to wait, I said to Eric, low, not taking my eyes off the elder. Nobody has to raid anyone. There's no skewered meat or cheese out here, I know that, but I'll sort something out. Eric translated, his voice unsteady. The elder looked down at me, a small, unarmed human, the kind of soft, fragile thing his desperate people had just been arguing over. And for one held breath, the whole forest waited to see whether kindness was the bravest thing standing in it, or only the most foolish. I had staked everything I owned on it being the first. 100 hollow faces watched me, and not one of them blinked. I stood in the open with my hands empty and a white flower pinned over my heart, and I could feel the whole clearing leaning toward me the way a starving animal leans toward a smell. The great chestnut spread its bare branches above us all. Under it, the orcs waited, thin and gaunt and silent, weighing whether the small unarmed human in front of them was brave or simply food that had not understood the rules yet. Beside me, Eric was coming apart. He had been our voice all the way into this forest. He had turned 3 young warriors into laughing guides on the road, and I had watched him learn, hour by hour, that he belonged somewhere. But that gift of his ran on the same thing every gift runs on, and his had just run dry. The orcs were too hungry to hear him. He could feel every one of them, and none of them would quiet, and the not quieting was tearing him open in front of everyone. "I cannot hold them," he whispered. His hands had started to shake. "I can hear all of them at once, and they will not listen. They are too far gone to listen. And if they decide, if they breathe." I set a hand on his shoulder and left it there. "You're not alone anymore. Remember that part. That's the part that's true." His jaw worked. "I know that. I do. I reached up and tapped the gardenia at his chest, the same white bloom I wore, the one Mia had dared the whole table to argue with. "Then look down, Eric. You're wearing what I'm wearing. That means whatever happens next happens to all of us, together. You don't have to carry this clearing by yourself. You just have to give me 1 minute of room." Something in his breathing changed. Not steady, not yet, but no longer falling. Behind us, I heard the soft hiss of Sarah's saber settling back into its sheath a fraction. A deliberate sound, a choice to trust me made out loud in the only language she had. Holly had both hands knotted in Mia's sleeve. Mia had gone very still, her tail low and flat, her eyes tracking the broad shapes in the branches. Nobody ran. That was its own kind of courage, and I loved them for it. The elder came forward then, leaning on his tall staff, his beads and worn bits of beaten metal clicking against his chest. He put the question to us again through Eric, and even drained, Eric gave me the shape of it. The old one did not want to do this. His people were hungry. The forest was dying around them, and the soil under their feet gave less every season. And a hungry people, he said, does what hungry people have always done. I had heard a lot of men in fine coats explain why cruelty was only sense. This was the first time I had heard it from someone with nothing, and it landed differently. He was not threatening me. He was apologizing in advance. "Tell him I'm not here to fight," I said. "Tell him I came to fix the thing underneath all of this. He doesn't want to come down on the human towns. He wants his people fed. I can feed them, right here, today." I looked past the elder at the bare ground beneath the great tree, at the dead vines threaded through the leaf litter, brown and curled and forgotten. Ask him what his people used to grow here before the land turned. Ask him what they miss the most, Eric translated. The elder's eyes moved from me to the soil and back, narrow with the suspicion that was mostly grief. The word came back rough and short, and Eric breathed it out like it cost him something. Mountain yams. They had grown them around the mother tree for longer than anyone living could remember, and they had not had a true harvest in years. "Then ask him for a patch of dirt," I said. "Just a demonstration. If nothing happens, you've lost nothing but a little time. If something does, then we talk like people who owe each other a meal." Eric pulled himself together to deliver it, and I watched him do the thing I had hoped he could do, which was speak past his own fear because someone he cared about needed him to. The elder listened. For a long moment, the only sound was the wind moving through the dead branches overhead. Then the old orc thumped the butt of his staff once against the earth and stepped back. And the meaning of that did not need translating. "Show me," it said. "Show me, and be quick about it." I knelt and pressed both palms flat to the cold ground. People had spent years telling me what this magic was worth. A court full of the most gifted mages in the realm had measured me, found a single small thing I could do, and decided that single small thing made me garbage. I had carried their verdict so long, I sometimes forgot it was theirs and not mine. Wilt recollection. The gift that brings dead green things back. The worthless one. I closed my eyes and reached for it anyway. It does not come with words. There are no chants, no signs drawn in the air. It rises from somewhere under my ribs like water finding a crack, and I pour it down through my hands into whatever is dying, and I tell it without telling it anything, to remember. To remember what it was. To remember being alive. The dead vines remembered. I felt them first as a tremor against my palms, a thready pulse running out through the leaf litter in every direction. The brown curls of old growth under the mother tree drew a breath they had not drawn in years. And then, all around the kneeling shape of me, the ground began to move. Adrian, that was Mia, somewhere behind me, her voice gone high and thin. "Adrian, the dirt. Put your back into it. It's working. It's actually..." I put my back into it. I gave it everything I had, and then I reached past everything and gave it more. The vines came up like a tide. Green ran out from my hands across the dead clearing, leaf after leaf unfolding faster than the eye could hold. A wave of new growth racing outward under the great tree and past it, climbing the slope, threading between the rough huts, swallowing the bare gray earth that had fed no one for years. It did not stop at the edge of the clearing. It rolled on, 100 paces in every direction, a green sea where a starving village had stood, broad heart-shaped leaves nodding in the watery light that was finding its way at last through the clouds. and under that sea, the ground swelled. The yams came up fat and enormous, straining against the soil, lifting the earth in long ridges, the way a held breath lifts a chest. They broke the surface huge and pale and impossible. More food in one stroke than this place had seen in a generation. More than 100 mouths could finish in a season. For one heartbeat, the whole village simply stared. Then an old orc near me dropped to his knees and clawed a yam out of the dirt with both hands and held it up and made a sound I will hear for the rest of my life. It was not a war cry. It was the noise a person makes when the thing they had stopped letting themselves hope for arrives anyway. The clearing broke open into joy. They poured out of the huts and down from the branches, the broad, terrifying shapes I had been so afraid of an hour ago, and they fell on that green field laughing, hauling yams up out of the earth and holding them over their heads, calling to one another, pressing the food into the arms of the smallest and thinnest first. The young warriors who had guided us through the forest were whooping and wrestling each other in the vines. Goblins darted at the edges and were, for once, simply let be. A famine ended in front of me in the time it takes to tell it, and it ended because of the one thing the cleverest men in the kingdom had thrown in the gutter. I tried to stand, and my legs would not have it. The cost had come due all at once. My reserve was scraped down to the bottom, the way a well runs to mud, and the clearing tilted gently sideways. I went down to one knee in the leaves. Adrian! Holly was there before I finished falling, her hands on my arm, her dog ears flat with worry, and her face very close to mine. Adrian, you're gray. You went all gray, are you? I'm fine. I caught her hand to prove it and managed something close to a smile. Just emptied the bucket. Give me a minute and it fills back up. I looked out over the field, over the 100 faces that had wanted to eat us and were now weeping over root vegetables. Worth it though. Look at that. Tell me that wasn't worth it. She looked. And then this young woman who had once been too frightened to want anything at all started laughing and crying at the same time and did not let go of my arm. The elder came to me through the celebration, and the whole village seemed to quiet around him as he walked. He stopped in front of where I sat in the leaves, and for a moment, he only looked at me, this small, spent human who had walked into his dying home with no weapon and a flower on his chest. Then the old orc lowered himself down, joint by joint. His staff laid aside, and he knelt. 100 of his people went still and knelt with him. I have stood in throne rooms hung with more gold than a frontier county sees in a lifetime, and I have never once felt what I felt then. Eric knelt beside me to give me his words, and his voice had stopped shaking entirely. The old grievances would not simply vanish, the elder said. The world had done too much to both our peoples for that, but old grievances were one thing, and new vows were another, and new bonds a man could still choose to make. He pressed one broad weathered hand flat to the turned earth, and he swore on it. If ever trouble found me, wherever I was, the people of the Black Forest would come. I had only to call, and they would answer. Tell him, I said quietly, that I'll hold him to it, and that I hope I never have to, Eric told him. The elder showed his worn tusks in something that was unmistakably a grin, and the clearing roared its approval, and I felt that promise settle into the back of my mind like a seed dropped into good soil, the kind you forget you planted until the day you suddenly, desperately need it. Then, Sarah's voice cut across the whole clearing, sharp with an alarm I had not heard from her facing actual monsters. Adrian, do something. I turned. 3 of the young warriors had cornered our knight against the trunk of the great tree, and they were not menacing her. They were preening. One was flexing. One had brought her an armful of the largest yams in the field, as though presenting a dowry. The third appeared to be in a heated argument with the other 2 about which of them had seen her first. Sarah, who had bound a monster duke and held a seawall, stood pinned between 3 smitten orcs with the most haunted expression I have ever seen on a soldier's face. They're courting her, Eric reported, and the wretch had the nerve to sound delighted. All 3. They cannot agree on the order. Adrian, Sarah said again, with murder in it. I let her suffer for exactly 1 heartbeat longer than I needed to, because some things you do not get to witness twice in a life. And then I had Eric gently explain that the lady was spoken for by her sword and her own bad temper, and the young ones retreated, crestfallen, to console themselves with lunch. Sarah wiped her brow, glared at me, and pretended she had not nearly drawn steel on a vegetable. Mia was laughing so hard she had to sit down. Holly was trying not to, and failing. For a little while there, in the long gold light, with a fed and grateful people loud around us. We were simply a family that had pulled off something impossible and lived to be embarrassed about it. That was the day I stopped letting their verdict be mine. A court had measured me and called the thing I could do worthless, and I had half believed them for years. But worthless does not end a famine. Worthless does not turn 100 enemies into people who would cross a forest to die for you. Whatever they had decided about me in their gilded hall, the proof was lying all around me in the dirt, green and enormous and impossible to argue with. The lie had a crack in it now. I could feel it. We made ready to ride home as the light went amber, the orcs loading our packs with more yams than the horses wanted to carry. And it should have been a clean and perfect day. But on the road back, riding easy through the cooling trees, I caught the tail of something in the talk between the Hound Squad riders. A name passed low between two of them. A rumor come up from the south. The genius who had thrown me away. Word that he had not simply vanished after the fall, that something stranger and worse was stirring out there where the land had gone to salt. I did not turn around. I did not let it touch the day we had just earned, but I marked it. Somewhere out past the green I had just made, in the part of the world that was still dying, the man who had called me worthless was not finished, and neither, I was beginning to understand, was I. We came home from the Black Forest with a cart of mountain yams, and the smell of turned earth still under our nails, and for a little while, the world let us breathe. The garden behind our cottage had been half dead when we took the place, so I spent most of that first week with my hands in the cold dirt, coaxing a withered plum tree back toward green. That was the shape of my days now. Small work, quiet work, the kind nobody writes songs about. People had called my magic worthless for years, and there were mornings I had almost believed them. But a living thing leaning back toward the sun is not nothing. I had paid for that lesson with everything else I owned, and I was not about to waste it. That afternoon, the gate banged open, and Holly came through it glowing. A season ago, she had flinched at the sound of her own name, a dog-eared young woman who had learned to make herself small. Now her tail swept the air like a flag in a high wind. I played, she said, still catching her breath, all afternoon, with people I'd never even met. There were a few young folk down by the field, Mia added, strolling in after her, cat ears tipped lazy and proud. They stared at our ears for about a heartbeat. Then, all they wanted to know was who could run faster. Holly's hands twisted in her skirt. I froze at first, the way I used to. She looked up at me, and the old fear was still in her face. But it was a small thing now, something she could hold in one hand. And then I just didn't. I ran with them until the light went gold. I set down the trowel and brushed the dirt from my palms. That might be the bravest thing you've told me all month, she laughed, and the sound of it did more for me than any harvest. I wanted to keep that exact afternoon forever. The gold light, the wagging tail, the plum tree leaning back toward the sun. I should have known better. The world had already started taking it back. The first sign came from the far south, though it took weeks to reach us. Down on the warm peninsula they call Southreach, the light had never fallen. The land there was green and rich, and for generations, the people who worked it had been ground down by an order imposed from the old capital, backs bent under a man named Brock, and the lords who propped him up. When the world broke, that order broke with it. The laborers he had spent his whole life despising rose against him all at once, and there were too many to stop. I am told Brock tried to run. He did not survive the flight. Within a single month of the world's end, a rule built on cruelty simply fell apart, the way rotten timber falls the moment you stop holding it up. What rose in its place was something I almost wanted to believe in. A wolf-bearing leader named Magnus raised a free nation out of the freed people, and he swore an oath that carried even to us, that he would search the broken world for any survivors still suffering and reach them. Even ruin, it turned out, could grow something good. But the South was not where the real thing was waking. The real thing was waking at the dead center of everything. I did not see what happened in the dead heart of the continent. No one did and lived to tell it plain. But I have put the pieces together since, and I can tell you what woke there. The light had burned the middle of the world to a white waste 1,000 miles across. Ash where cities had stood, nothing living for as far as the surveys ever reached. And beneath where the gilded capital once gleamed, one deep vault had survived, so had something inside it. The man who threw me out of that court did not die in the fire. Victor, the same crystal that had once humiliated him, had kept him alive. And it kept him alive the only way it knew how, by pulling the life out of everything near it. He took the last survivors hiding in that vault and left them as empty as the rest of the waste. With what he stole, he began to make things. Servants shaped from black crystal, silent, with folded wings, that did not breathe and did not feel. And he sent them out across the dead lands to hunt for whatever never still drew breath. Then, down in the black water that had filled the crater above his keep, he opened his eyes. Whatever was left of the genius I had known had curdled into pure hunger. He looked north, toward the only warmth left in the world, and he said 2 words, "Found you." I would not hear those words for a long time, but I think some part of me felt them that night, the way you feel a draft before you find the open door. Word came to Ashford the way bad news always does, in pieces, each one worse than the last. Gareth had sent survey teams out across the Deadlands the month we arrived, hoping to find other survivors, other towns, anything. He called me to the war hall to hear what they had found. I think he wanted the people who had turned a starving horde into friends to be in the room when the rest of it landed. Evelyn laid the reports out on the long table, her spectacles catching the gray light. 3 weeks of them. Most of the continent was white waste, she said, crumbling to ash at a touch. Where the old capital had been, there was now a crater tens of miles wide, slowly filling with black water. No towns, no survivors, nothing. And then there is the 6th team, she said, and her voice changed. Gareth looked up. They were nearest the center. Their last message came in 2 days ago. She did not read it from the page. She had it by heart. A black monster. That was all. Then nothing. They have not answered since. For a moment, no one spoke. Gareth dragged a hand down his face. "First the world ends," he muttered. "And now it's sending us couriers. Give me a break." He pulled the nearer teams back from the center and kept only the coast surveys running. He would not throw good people after lost ones into a thing he could not name. That was when Evelyn's composure finally cracked. "Where did the world go?" she said, very quietly. "Are we all that's left? Just a mirage? Adrift in the white?" Gareth crossed to her and set a hand on her shoulder. "Don't. That was just my foolish talk." His voice softened into something stubborn and kind. "The North March has always survived being forgotten. It's the one thing we're good at." I said nothing, but I was already thinking about that last message and about the word the survey team had used, a black monster. I did not like how neatly it sat next to a rumor I had brought home from the south. We did not have to wait long for it to come to us. The 5th survey team came running for the border with the thing a full mile behind them. By the time the warning reached Ashford, I was already on the road south with Hugo, 15 of the North March's best, and Eric. I had brought Eric on purpose. His gift had reached into 100 starving orcs and turned them from enemies into family. If anything alive could be talked down, he was the one who could do it. The captain split the soldiers into 2 lines across the only pass it could take. Then we saw it crest the rise, and the word monster stopped feeling like enough. It walked upright, twice the height of a tall man, its body a glistening black. 2 great bat wings folded against its back. At first it had no eyes at all. Then eyes opened all across its head, dozens of them, and not one of them was looking at anything I would call alive. It came down on the line in a single leap. Blades skated off its hide like rain off slate. "Hold the flanks," I called, and threw everything I had into the dirt. Vines tore up out of the cold ground and wrapped its limbs. It strained, and the vines began to split, so I gave it no room to win the contest. I poured my will down into the earth and raised a cage of green wood around it, trees shooting up faster than it could break them, hemming it on every side. "Eric, reach it," I said. "If there's a mind in there, find it." He pressed forward, both hands lifted, his red eyes half closing the way they did when he listened, and then his whole face went wrong. He stumbled back as if something had shoved him. "There's nothing," he whispered. "Adrian, there's nothing in it. No heart, no fear, no hunger, no self. It's a hole shaped like a creature." His voice shook. "My gift has never once hit a wall like that. There's nothing in there to reach." So I stopped reaching. Then we ended here. I looked back over my shoulder. "Now, Hugo." He had been white as chalk the whole time, but he planted his feet. "I've been training," he said, mostly to himself. "I can do this." He swung his wand up and let the lightning go, a single half-strength bolt that lit the whole pass white. When my eyes cleared, the thing inside the cage was simply gone. Nothing left to bury. The soldiers cheered. I didn't, because I had watched it the whole time, and one thing would not let go of me. It had been holding back. It could have torn through us at the start, and it hadn't. It had thrown half-speed strikes and let the 5th team run all the way to our line. It had not come to kill. It had come to look. By the time the carriage rolled back through the gates of Ashford, the lanterns were lit, and the whole household was waiting in the courtyard. Holly hit me before I was halfway out, arms locked around my middle. "You're back," she said into my coat, and I felt her shaking. She had refused to go to bed. "If I'm waiting up," she'd apparently told Sarah, "I'm waiting up at the gate." "Me too. I want one too," Mia announced, and landed on my back like a dropped sack, all elbows and pride. Then something silver came out of the dark and smacked into my face. I peeled it off. It was a wyvern, no bigger than a cat, scales like polished coin, blinking at me upside down. While we'd been at the border, the orcs had sent it up the road as a gift, and Eric had not let it out of his sight since. His whole face opened up. "His name is Pip," he said, gathering the little thing against his chest. "He was just born. His mother's gone, and he was hungry. And he chose me. For a man who had woken alone in a dying world 900 years deep, he said it like he'd been handed the sun." Sarah leaned in the doorway in full armor, the dried lilac still pinned over her heart, and looked us over. "2 squads for 1 beast," she said dryly. "And here's the one the little ones actually missed. Home at last." But her eyes checked me head to foot, the way they always did, counting that I'd come back whole. For one held breath, it was everything I'd been fighting to keep: the gold light, the wagging tail, the little dragon. I let myself have it. Then I remembered the thing in the cage that had come only to look, and the warmth went thin in my chest. Gareth did not want the report. He wanted my gut. "The pages give me facts," he said, settling back with his arms folded. "But I've lived long enough to trust a man's stomach over a clerk's ink. How did it feel out there, Adrian?" I told him the truth. It felt like a scout. The room went still. It held back. It could have killed the 5th team a mile from the border, and it chose not to. It threw half-strength blows at a line it could have broken. It wasn't trying to win. It was measuring us. How many we are, what we can do, how hard we'd be to take. I let that sit. Something built it and aimed it at us, and whatever sent one to look will send the rest to finish. Diana drew a slow breath. Then this was a beginning, not an end. "There's worse," I said, and nodded at Eric. He repeated quietly what he'd found in the past, that he had reached for the thing's mind and touched a void. "No heart, nothing to turn. My gift only works on what has a heart," Eric said. "Monsters, beasts, even the orcs, they feel something, so I can reach them. These don't feel anything. There's nothing inside them at all." He looked sick. "I can't talk them down. No one can. They can only be fought." The weight of that settled over the table. Whoever was coming had stripped away the one mercy we had. The gift that let us turn enemies into family was useless here. I set my hands flat on the wood. "Then we stop them. And whoever is sending these things into our home," I said, "I am going to make them answer for it." Gareth held my eyes a moment, then nodded once, as if filing it away. Evelyn cleared her throat and broke the spell on purpose. "Well, before either of you saves the world, you both reek of swamp and lightning." She made a shooing motion at me and Eric. "The baths. Now, the doom will keep until morning." It got the small laugh she'd reached for. We even believed her. The doom did not keep until morning. I had barely slept when the crystal ball on the side table flared to life in the small hours, and the watch post's voice crackled out into the dark of my room. Sarah was awake before I was, already reaching for her saber where it leaned by the door. "The first outpost, north of the city." A tired voice, half a yawn. "First post, all quiet." Then it changed. Then it climbed into something I had heard before, on the worst nights of my life. "Enemy attack! A black wave! Countless! There's too many! They're—" The voice broke off. The crystal ball hissed and went quiet, and did not come back. Sarah and I looked at each other across the cold room. Neither of us said the word out loud. We didn't have to. The thing in the cage had come only to look, and now it had finished looking. They were here. The report had come in the dead of night. A black wave, countless. And then the watchman's voice cut off mid-word. The scout had only come to look. Now it had finished looking, and the rest of them had come behind it. By the time the sky went the color of ash, we were already on the river. 1,000 of us were strung along the bank, soldiers and guild fighters, and one D-rank plant mage who had no business standing in a line like that. Gareth had sent our party south because he had nothing left to send that frightened him more than losing us. We were the gamble. Then the far bank moved, and the gamble started to look like a mistake. They came out of the mist taller than the scout had been, twice a man's height, glass black and many-eyed, wings folding and unfolding, like something deciding how to land. And these ones breathed. A throat would glow, and then a line of blue-white fire would open across the dark, and wherever it touched, the line thinned. "They're bigger than the last," Sarah shouted, already moving. Her saber came up and caught the dawn. "The eyes, Adrian. Go for the eyes. It's the only soft thing on them." I heard her. So did maybe 10 men near us. The other 1,000 heard only the fire and the screaming. And a thing you cannot hear over is the same as a thing nobody said. Beside me, Eric had gone the color of cold milk. He reached out the way he always did, the way that had turned a horde of starving orcs into friends. Feeling for the small, warm shape of a mind he could speak to, he found nothing. Not anger, not hunger. A rotted pit with the bottom fallen out. "There's no one in there," he whispered, and his hands were shaking. "It's just dark, Adrian. It's dark all the way down. I can't. There's nothing to talk to." I put a hand on the back of his neck and held him steady, because that was the only thing I had that worked. My vines could bind one of them. I bound 3 before my arms ran out of strength, and 3 out of 200 is not a battle. It is a man trying to hold back the tide with his fingers. The line did not break the way a wall breaks. It broke the way a rope does, 1 strand at a time, faster and faster, until there was no rope. The black shapes crossed the river without slowing, stepped over the place where the front rank had been, and went for the city behind us. Ashford began to burn. We fell back into the streets, the 3 of us, because the river was lost and the only thing left worth saving was inside the walls. Diana was in the keep. Holly and Mia were in the keep. If the line could not hold the field, then we would hold the road to that gate, and we would hold it with whatever was left. The smoke turned the morning into a low orange dusk. Roofs came down on either side of us in soft, roaring collapses, and the heat pressed on my face like a hand. A soldier caught my sleeve as I passed him. He was down against a wall, and he was not getting up, and he knew it, and what he asked me for was not a healer. He asked me to make sure the people behind the next door got out. I told him I would. I have kept smaller promises and felt worse about them. Then the smoke split, and one of them was in front of me. It dropped into the street the way a stone drops into a well, all that black weight landing without a sound, and the cold eyes turned and found me. I threw out everything I had left, a handful of green threads. Against that thing, it was a whisper thrown at a landslide. I remember thinking, very clearly and very stupidly, that this was as far as a D rank goes, that the man who had thrown a single gold coin at me and called me worthless had been right after all, and that I was about to prove him right in a burning street with my friends watching. Adrian. Sarah was too far. Eric was behind me. There was no one close enough. The thing raised one long arm. A line of gold came down out of the smoke, and the arm was simply gone, and the thing with it scattered into black dust that the wind took before it hit the ground. Then the rest of them began to come apart. It happened up and down the street, and then beyond the street, all across the burning city at once. A snap of light, and a monster ended. A snap, and another, faster than the eye could fix on, as if some hand had reached over the whole battlefield and started turning them off one by one. In the space of a held breath, the things that had broken 1,000 men were dust on the wind, and the only sound left was the fire. A figure walked up the middle of the road through the settling ash, unhurried, untouched, dressed in white and gold without a smudge on him. Long blonde hair, a coat that caught the firelight and gave it back richer. I knew the walk before I knew the face. I had stood below that walk on the day my old life ended. Victor. The soldiers around us did not know him as I knew him. They saw a man in pristine gold stroll into a city that was dying and make the dying stop with a flick of his fingers. They went to their knees. Someone called him a savior, and then everyone was calling him that, the word passing down the smoking street like a flame catching. I should have felt relief. Part of me did, the animal part that had just been one breath from the end. The rest of me went very cold and very still because the timing was too clean. The monsters had not retreated. They had not fought to the last. They had stopped, all of them, at the exact instant their work was done and their audience was watching. You do not switch off a storm. You switch off a thing you built. He found me in the kneeling crowd. Out of every face turned up to worship him, his eyes came to the one man on his feet, and he smiled at me. A small, private, pleased smile. The smile of a man who has set a table and is waiting for you to notice the meal is you. They carried him into the square on their gratitude. Soldiers who had watched their friends fall an hour before now jostled to be near him, and he let them, the way a lord lets dogs jump up so long as their paws are clean. He told them a story while they listened. He told them the ruin of the world had not been the light at all, but the dead queen's madness, that she had broken everything and he had survived to put it back. And a frightened crowd will swallow any story that hands the blame to someone already gone and the rescue to the man standing in front of them. They believed him because believing him felt better than the truth. And then, because a man like that cannot let a good moment pass without spoiling it, he looked for me again. He found me at the edge of the crowd and he said it loud so the whole square could share it. He asked, in that bright carrying voice, whether this was not the useless one he had personally thrown out of the palace, the D-rank failure, the man whose magic was good for growing weeds. He spread the old verdict over the rubble like he was doing them all a favor, reminding them what worthless looked like so they could admire by contrast what worth looked like. The crowd laughed. That was the part I had not braced for. The dust of the dead was still settling and they laughed because because their savior had told them to, and a man on his knees will laugh at whatever the man standing over him points at. It was the throne room all over again. The same words, the same sneer. Only now there was no court, just 1,000 strangers in the ash, and they took up his joke as if it were a gift. I did not answer him. I had learned a long time ago and at great cost that there is a kind of man you do not argue with in his own theater. You wait. You let him build the stage as high as he wants. Then you let it fall. Sarah pulled me out of the crowd by the arm before I could be made into more of a show. She was leaning on her saber, favoring a leg that had been thrown hard against the stones, and her jaw was set in the line I knew meant she was swallowing something for later. "Let it go," she said, low. "Not here. Holly and Mia are safe in the keep, and that is the only thing in this city worth a single word from you. Let him have his crowd." I was going to tell her I already had. Then Eric caught my other sleeve, and his grip stopped me cold. He had been quiet since the river, quiet in the wrong way. Now he looked up at me, and the old fear was back in his face, but underneath it was something worse, something certain. "His magic," he whispered. "Adrian, his magic. It's the same." "The same as what?" "As them, the black ones." He pressed closer, as if saying it softer made it less true. "Yours is clear, like water with light in it. Hugo's is loud, but it's clean. His is, it's black and tangled, and it's rotting. And it is the exact same wrongness I felt reaching into those things at the river. The same nothing. It's coming from inside him." The square behind us was still cheering its savior, and the one person in this whole territory who could see what a thing was made of had just told me that the man who killed the monsters and the monsters themselves were cut from one cloth. I looked at Sarah. She had heard it too, and the color had gone out of her anger and left only the cold. "The castle," I said, "now, before they walk that into Diana's home and call it a guest." We did not get there first. I am not a runner, and a procession moves faster than 3 tired people on foot, and by the time we came up the rise, the gold of him was already standing at the castle gate with the crowd at his back like a tide. A colonel was puffing himself up at the front of it, demanding the gate be opened for the man who saved the territory. The grass courtyard lay green and absurd beyond the bars, flower beds untouched, a small, clean world the fire had not yet reached. And in the open gate, alone, with her spectacles catching the light and her hands folded in front of her like she was about to discuss a grain ledger, stood Evelyn. She did not open the gate. She let the savior stand there in front of his worshippers, and she named him a traitor to the crown, plainly, the way you might note that it had begun to rain. The crowd went still. The colonel sputtered. Victor laughed it off, of course, all wounded grandeur, asking how she dared, calling it absurd that the man who had just bled to save them be met with chains. Evelyn was not moved. She has never in her life been moved by a man's volume. She asked him a single question, and she asked it slowly enough that everyone could follow. How, she wanted to know, had he crossed the entire breadth of the territory and arrived at this exact city at this exact hour when every league of that land was watched, and the watchers had caught the monsters coming, every wave of them on the crystals, and had never once, anywhere, caught him. Unless, she said, he had traveled with the things he claimed to have fought. Unless the monsters had been his escort the whole way. She let that sit in the air. Behind the gold of his smile, for just a moment, something flat and ugly looked out. A door opened on the balcony above the gate, and they came out into the light. Gareth first, broad and grim. Diana beside him, in pale silver, her chin up. Walter a step behind her with his white gloves, and his hands closed into fists he was barely keeping at his sides. And between them, small against all that stone, holding the rail with both hands, Holly. Diana spoke down to him first, and there was no fear in it, only a sorrow worn smooth. She called it a bitter reunion. She told him he was lying, and asked almost gently whether he even knew the meaning of the word evidence. He, who had once stood in a throne room and called her a foolish dreamer for loving real flowers over gold. The foolish dreamer was telling the truth now. He was the one unmoored from the world. Then Diana turned and asked Holly, softly, to tell them what she could smell. I came up the last of the rise just in time to see it. Holly, who a season ago could not cross a market without freezing at the sight of a stranger's face. Holly, who flinched from raised voices. She looked down at the most powerful mage anyone in that crowd had ever seen, the man whose kind had thrown her out with the trash, and her voice shook, and she said it anyway. "That man smells the same as the black monsters," she said, both hands white on the rail. "The same as the ones that attacked us. A very bad smell." the worst smell. It is on him exactly the way it was on them. For one breath, the whole crowd looked at a dog-eared young woman on a balcony and understood that she was right. The colonel's face fell. The soldiers nearest the gate stepped back from their savior without deciding to. Gareth's hand came down steady on Holly's shoulder. "I believe her," he said, loud enough to carry the length of the courtyard. "She is family and a comrade, and her word stands over any rank alive." And that was the thing the man in gold could not survive. Not Evelyn's logic, not Diana's testimony, the smell, named out loud by the exact kind of small discarded creature he had spent his whole life stepping over. The thing he had thrown away had reached up and pulled the mask off his face in front of everyone. The smile did not fade, it broke. The air changed before he moved. The wind came up wrong, dragging inward toward him, and the green courtyard grass bent flat as if something underground had begun to breathe in. He stopped pretending to be wounded and started telling them all to be quiet. The same two words, over and over, climbing, and a wall of force went out from him in every direction. It did not care who had cheered for him. His own worshippers went down like wheat, flung back off their feet. The colonel and the front rank scattered across the rubble. The flower beds tore loose. The thing in his chest that fed on living things showed, just for a second, in the way the grass around his feet went gray and dead in a perfect circle, while everything in him lit up brighter. The storm was tearing the courtyard apart, and the crowd that had carried him in on their shoulders was crawling away from him across the stones. The savior was gone. What was left in the gold coat was the thing Eric had felt at the river, standing where everyone could finally see it. I walked through the scattering people toward the gate. Sarah was at my shoulder, saber out, the leg forgotten. Eric came on my other side, pale but there. Nobody tried to stop us because everybody else was going the other way. A long time ago, this man had handed me one coin and told me what I was worth, and I had walked out of that room with my head up because it was the only thing I had left to hold. I had spent years thinking that day was the end of my story. Standing in that wind, watching him drop the last of the disguise, I finally understood it had only been the start of his. He had broken the world and come back to be thanked for it. He had built the monsters, killed the monsters, and pinned the dying to the ground so they would love him for it. And the price for stopping him was going to be mine to pay, because I was the one who had seen what he was from the very first day, before the gold, before the crowd, before the lie. I had wanted, since the night the first scout came, to make whoever sent these things answer for them. Now, the whoever had a face I knew, and the answering started here. I stopped at the edge of his storm. The wind pulled up my cloak, and the dead gray circle of grass spread toward my boots. And above us on the balcony, Holly was still gripping the rail, watching, having done the bravest thing in that whole burning city, with nothing but the truth and her nose. Victor's head turned toward me through the howling light, and the flat, ugly thing behind his eyes fixed on the only man who had never once knelt. I did not raise my hands. I did not shout over the wind. I let the words go quiet and flat, the way he had once said his to me. "That's enough, Victor. That's enough, Victor." The wind ate the words. He stood at the center of it, white and gold and untouched, and the grass around his boots had already gone gray. Sarah did not wait for me. She came off the line with her saber up, naming him traitor, a man who had lied to the crown, loosed monsters on a country, and let it burn so he could walk in and be called its savior. Every word was true. None of it would stop him. Steady. I caught her shoulder before she crossed into his reach. "We read him first, then we move." Eric's hand closed on my sleeve. He had gone the color of ash, and his eyes were fixed on the air around Victor, as if he could see something the rest of us could not, because he could. "Victor's magic," he whispered, "was black and rotten, knotted wrong, the kind of power you only got by pulling it out of a great many people at once. Not earned, stolen. It matched the wrongness Holly had smelled on the gargoyles. They came from him. Behind us at the gate, Evelyn had not moved. She had met his procession alone and made him answer questions, and I realized only now what those slow minutes had bought. Time. Time for us to reach the courtyard. Time to set our feet. She had stalled a god at the door so the rest of us could choose where to stand. Victor looked at the four of us the way a man looks at weeds in a garden he already owns. He told us, almost gently, that all of this was finished. The country, the people, the small lives clinging to it. He would wipe it clean and begin again, and it would be his. Then a mark on his brow began to glow. The wind reversed. It dragged inward, toward him, toward the black thing I could feel beating under his coat. And the men nearest him, his own, the ones who had carried him in on their shoulders an hour ago, sank where they stood and did not rise. He did not touch them. He did not need to. Whatever he was now, it fed, and it did not care whose life filled it. I drove my will down into the dead hedge along the wall. Brown branches woke green and shot upward in a thick living wall between him and us, and I felt the drain claw at it the moment it grew, trying to pull the life back out of every leaf. Behind me, I planted my feet and held the wall up by main force. Both of you, behind me! The hound squad struck him from the flank, fast and disciplined, and a single sweep of his arm threw the whole cell back across the stones. Then he changed. His body twisted, black hide spreading over the white and gold, leathery wings unfolding from his back, a tail lashing out behind him, two blunt horns curling up from his skull. The shape of a gargoyle grew over the man, but the face stayed. That was the worst of it. The same handsome court face sat in the middle of the monster, smiling, certain it had just made itself into something we could not touch. Gareth's voice came down from the steps, flat and hard, warning his men to stay out of the thing's reach. It pulled the life right out of you. I braced for the next blow. It did not come because Eric started laughing. It broke out of him helpless and bright, and he was pointing at the monster's forehead, at the crude mark branded into the skin there. I followed his finger, and the dread in my chest cracked straight down the middle because I could read it too. That word on his head, Eric could barely get it out. It just says filth. Did nobody ever tell him? It was Old Elvish, a dead tongue almost no one alive still read, but a dark elf 900 years old did, and so did a boy a witch had taught in a forest. The ancients had woken, looked at the man who came begging for their power, and left their answer scrawled across his brow like a word you scrub off a wall. Filth. Garbage. They had given him his godhood, the way you toss a scrap to a dog, and they had labeled the dog on the way out. I laughed. I couldn't help it either. After everything, the burning, the lies, the crowd cheering my own banishment back at me, the dreaded supreme mage of the age had been walking around with refuse written on his face, too proud to ask what it said. Sarah laughed. The hound squad, scattered and aching on the stones, laughed. The fear that had owned that courtyard came apart all at once, and the monster in the middle of it screamed, and the smile finally fell off his human face. He came at us raging, screaming that he was the strongest mage who had ever lived, that no D-rank weed would deny him. I threw vines at him out of the dead earth. They wrapped his arms, his wings, dragged him down for a single heartbeat, and he tore through every strand with raw power, no shaping to it at all. That told me something I tucked away and kept. He couldn't cast anymore, not really. The man who once bent gold with a thought had nothing left but the brute weight of the thing he'd stolen. A shockwave came off him in a black ring. I got my body between it and Eric and let it throw us both into the hedge. Gareth had the squad reforming below, his voice cutting through the chaos. In the North March's name, surround him. Cut him down, he stands alone. And he did stand alone. He had eaten everyone who ever stood beside him. So I ran, and as I ran, I worked. Every few steps I pressed a twig, a pit, a knot of seed into the cracks of the courtyard and left it sleeping there. The squad pressed him in waves, landing blow after blow, wearing the monster down, and then black blood welled out of him and ran across the stones in a circle. The circle answered. Gargoyles rose out of it, twice a man's height, glassy and many-eyed, pouring up faster than we could count, and they fell on the squad. Good men went down under them. I will not pretend they didn't. Then I called my buried seeds awake all at once. A loquat tree exploded up through the center of the circle, splitting the stones, throwing roots wide, and the ritual broke under it like ice under a hammer. The flow of gargoyles choked off mid-rise. The monster turned its human face to me and gave one order to everything it had left. Kill that man. Gate! I hauled Eric up by the arm. Now, we ran. The gargoyles came after us through the streets, claws scraping stone, and I dragged thickets of wild rose up out of every gutter and dead window box to snag and slow them. Cedar, where the rose ran out. Anything with thorns and a will to live. Sarah ran at my shoulder, greatsword out, shouting townsfolk into doorways as we went. She asked the obvious thing between breaths. How long could we keep running before the things ran us down? We're not running to nowhere, Eric said. I looked at him. He had a small gray shape diving and wheeling above the rooftops. Pip, his little wyvern, chirping like the whole burning morning, was a game laid on for his amusement. Eric had called for help the night before. Evelyn had suggested it as a fallback, and he had sent Pip out over the river the evening before any of this, asking the forest folk to wait outside the walls, the orc tribes, the same orcs who had come down out of the hills starving and whom we had fed, a whole field of yams grown out of dead ground, so they would not have to choose between dying and raiding. I had thought of it then as the only decent thing to do. I had not thought of it as an investment. They're already here, Eric said, and the little dragon swept down, and pressed its snout to his cheek, and he grinned at it like a tired boy. "Thanks, Pip." Eric stopped dead in the middle of the square and planted his feet, and his left eye lit a deep green, rings of light turning inside it. He spread his hands and spoke a single long word in the old elven tongue, and I felt the air change, felt his mind go out across the whole town like a net thrown over water. The orcs hit the square a breath later. They did not come like a wild horde. They came in tight squads, 3 and 4 and 5 together, moving the way trained soldiers move, covering each other's flanks, striking and falling back on a rhythm none of them could have known on their own. Eric was the rhythm. He held 100 monster minds at once and made them one company, and that company tore into the gargoyles like wolves into a pen. Eric tried to reach the gargoyles too. The way he reached everything that breathed, I saw him flinch. There was nothing in them to reach. The same heartless void as before. No mind, no fear, no will to turn. So we did not turn them, we broke them. Sarah's greatsword came down, and a gargoyle came apart into black dust the wind took. I drove spikes of blackthorn up through another. The orcs swarmed the rest under, and the tide that had been drowning us all morning turned in the space of a few minutes. Then Eric folded. The green light went out of his eye, and he dropped. The strain of holding so many minds at full stretch finally taking him all at once. I caught him before he hit the stones and got an arm under him. The orcs were already pulling back the way they'd come, their work done. A few of them paused to wave, shyly, of all things, great tusked things ducking their heads, at Sarah, who stared back at them with her sword still up and absolutely no idea what to do with that. Later, I told her, hauling Eric's weight against my side. Castle. Diana and Holly and Mia are still inside, and so is he. He slipped in during all of this. I would only piece the rest of it together later, from what Gareth told me and what I saw in the wreckage, but I can tell it true. Victor had come into that hall in his monster shape and found Gareth waiting with his family's old sword drawn. Victor sneered at him, the treasure of the age, the genius who clawed his way to the summit, beaten by a D rank. Gareth told him no, rank was not worth. I had once asked Gareth for nothing but a warm bed and food for the outcasts I'd brought to his door, the ones the world had thrown away, and offered everything I had in return, and that, Gareth said, was worth more than any rank Victor would ever hold. The monster loosed a black wave that wrecked the hall. Gareth turned it on the flat of the old sacred sword, surprising himself more than anyone. Then Walter was there, the butler, white gloves and all, and he put a precise hard kick straight into that smug human face and asked it to mind its vulgar tongue. Between the two of them, they cracked the armored shell wide open and brought the monster down, but the shell was empty. The black husk crumbled to mist, and Victor stepped out of it apart from them, untouched, back in his white and gold, smiling again. He set the crystal in his chest working, and a draining field rolled out across the whole keep. It did not strike. It simply pulled. The strength and the magic dragged out of everyone inside it until their legs went and they could not stand. Gareth went to one knee, then to the floor. Walter tried to push up against it and was put flat. The field bled them like a wound that did not close. Victor kicked Gareth aside and told the empty hall that the entire castle was his feeding ground now. Then he turned toward the stairs, toward the room where Diana lay senseless, and the others had been carried, the wounded and the worn out, everyone too weak to run. He did not go to harm them with his hands. He went to drink them. They were not people to him. They were fuel, batteries to refill what he'd spent, and he walked toward them as casually as a man going to a well. Pinned to the floor and unable to rise, Gareth's last clear thought was a cold one, that I was coming, and that I would walk straight into the same field that had emptied him. He reached the room with the field going before him, and he found it was not undefended. Mia stood in the doorway between him and everyone behind her. The field was already dragging the strength out of her. I could see it later in how she described it, the way her knees shook, but she did not give the doorway up. She told him what she was now, a Gardenia knight. She told him he would not get past her, and she struck at him, and he threw her back across the floor. She got up. Shaking, white-faced, she got up and stood in the doorway again. Toby went at him too, a young man with red hair and more courage than sense. He hurled the only thing in his hands and then threw his whole body in to block the way, shouting at Victor to get away from her, that Holly had given him a charm and told him to look after Mia, and he meant to do it. A blast knocked him aside like a door swinging open. Holly had gone down under the field near the window, faint, barely able to lift her head. and still she dragged herself across the boards to where Toby had fallen, asking if he was all right. Victor looked at the four of them, the unconscious princess, and the two who could barely stand, and the one crawling, and his fraying mind made its lazy choice. Why pick one? He would simply drain the whole room at once. We came through the door before he could. I had wrapped Sarah and myself in fresh mint on the stairs, armfuls of it grown straight out of the cracks, bound around our shoulders and arms. Mint is a stubborn thing. Tear it out and it grows back. The draining field could not empty it faster than its own life pushed back, and that bought us 2 or 3 minutes of being able to stand inside a field that had dropped everyone else in the keep. We had passed them on the way up. Gareth, fallen but breathing, begging me to save the princess and the others, ashamed past bearing that the lord of the land had been brought so low. And Walter caught my sleeve from the floor with the last of himself, and gasped that he'd manage one thing before he went down. He'd pressed a sticky seed onto Victor, face and neck, marked him. I didn't understand yet what that would mean. I filed it away and kept climbing. In the room, Victor's hand closed on Holly and dragged her up in front of him as a shield, gloating at me over her shoulder, certain I would not dare. And something in me came loose. I had spent years being told my magic was worthless. I had spent that whole morning holding back, reading him, rationing what I had, fighting careful. I stopped being careful. Every promise I had ever made to the people behind me, that I would not leave them, not again, not ever, rose up at once and went down into the floor through my hands, and I poured all of it out without counting the cost. The boards burst. Growth came up through the whole room. Trunks, roots, a green flood splitting the floor and the walls, and it tore the draining field apart from the inside, faster than the crystal could hold it together. Sarah was already moving. She had Holly out of his grip and behind her before he understood the field was gone. I drove one shoot up out of the broken floor straight beneath him, a green spear thick as my leg, and it caught the great supreme mage of the age and threw him clean off his feet, out through the tall window, out into the gray morning, with a hidden seed on his face he didn't know was there, and a barrier I could already feel beginning to fail. He was not dead. I knew that even as he went through the glass. A thing like him does not die from a fall, but for the first time all morning, he was the one falling, and I was the one still standing in front of the people I loved. That would have to be enough. For one more breath, it was. The window stood empty where, a breath before, a man had been. Green growth still shivered along the splintered floorboards, the last of what I had torn out of myself to throw him through the glass. My hands would not stop shaking, so I made them. A thing like Victor did not die from a fall. I knew that the way I knew my own name, and it meant the morning was not finished with us, and the people on the floor behind me could not wait while I caught my breath. Sarah turned from the window, short sword low, her chest heaving under the mint we had wrapped around ourselves. Holly and Mia lay where the draining field had dropped them, two still shapes among the wreckage, their gardenia badges dull with dust. For one cold second, I could not tell if they were breathing. I went down between them and dug into the pouch at my belt. There was almost nothing left in me. After the surge that broke the field, my magic had dropped to a thin, guttering thread, less than a fifth of what I had started the day with. But waking a little life did not take much. I closed my hand around a pinch of dried valerian, old and crumbling, and woke it, felt the small green pulse of it answer, the leaves uncurling damp and sharp against my palm. I pressed it under Holly's nose first. "Stay with me," I said. "Can you hear me?" Her dog ears twitched, then her eyes opened, amber and swimming, and she dragged in a breath like someone surfacing from deep water. Beside her, Mia came back harder, coughing, one hand already swiping at the air as if to claw whatever had hurt her. "It's me." I caught the wrist before her nails found my cheek. "It's me. You're all right." Sarah crouched at my shoulder. I felt the guilt come off her before she said a word, that she had not been fast enough, that they had been harmed at all. "That's not on you," I told her, low, so only she would hear it. A scuff of movement near the wall. Toby pushed himself up, red hair plastered to his forehead, the little dried flower charm I had given him still swinging at his throat. The charm had done its work. It had blunted the worst of the draining field and kept him standing longer than the rest. He looked at the two of them on the floor, then at me, and his face crumpled with shame. He could not do anything, he told me, the words tumbling over each other. The charm had held off the bad magic, but he had been scared the whole time. "You put yourself between him and them," I said. "That's not nothing. That's the opposite of nothing." He swallowed, nodded, and reached for Holly's hand. "Then please," he got it out in pieces. "End that thing. Sir Mage, Lady Knight, please." From From the couch came a thread of a voice. Diana had come around, pale, one hand braced against the cushions, and she did not spend a word of it on herself. "Sarah, go, bring that mage down." Her green eyes found me. "Adrian, please." I left the worn out and the waking in Toby's keeping, met Sarah's eyes, and got to my feet. The stairs were a ruin, and the courtyard beyond them was worse. Victor stood in the middle of it, and the fall had not done what I half hoped it might. His fine white and gold coat hung torn open across the chest, the cloth scorched and filthy, and where his heart should have been, there was the crystal, a jagged black shard sunk into him, pulsing with a sick light. It had glowed an angry red when we came down the steps. By the time we reached the flagstones, it had gone a pale, fed blue. I understood why before I let myself look at the rest. 2 of the castle guards lay near him, fallen, not moving. He had taken what was left in them to hold himself together, the way a man might empty a lamp to keep one flame alive, and there was nothing I could do for them now. The crystal had drunk it. The crystal was brighter for it. Sarah did not wait for me. She crossed the distance in 3 strides and put everything she had into a single cut at his throat. The blade stopped a hand's width short. There was a barrier around him, black and oily, turning the air itself thick, and her steel rang off it like a hammer off a bell of cold iron. The shock ran up her arms and threw her back a pace. She set her feet and struck again, and each time that dark shell swallowed the blow and gave nothing. Victor laughed at us through it. I will not give him his words. I never have. But the shape of them was that he had become something past magic, past rank, past anything a discarded gardener and a scarred woman could ever touch. Invincible. He liked that word. He said it the way other men breathe. Then he turned his eyes on us, and the light behind them was the same black as the barrier, and a beam of it lashed out where Sarah had been standing. She rolled clear. The flagstone it touched cracked and went gray. A shockwave came behind it, flat and brutal, and it lifted us both off our feet and put us down hard against the rubble. I got up with the taste of stone dust in my mouth and made myself think. It was crude. That was the thing I held onto. The beam, the wave. There was no shape to any of it. No incantation, no circle, none of the cut glass precision that had once made him the most feared mage in the kingdom. He was not casting anymore. He was a vessel pouring itself out, and the thing he poured was whatever the crystal held. The barrier, the beams, the rotten strength, all of it came from that shard in his chest. Break the crystal, and there would be nothing left to be invincible with. "Sarah," I wiped my mouth. "It's the crystal. Everything he is now is in the crystal." She came up beside me, eyes on the black shell. The shard sat right behind it, lit and waiting. The one thing in the world I needed to reach, and the one place his barrier was thickest. I had no spell that could break that shell from the outside, but I did not need one. Walter had already handed me the way in. I just had not understood it until now. On the stairs, as we passed him fallen and breathing, Walter had caught my sleeve and gotten out a single ragged sentence. That before the field dropped him, he had pressed a handful of his lady's mistletoe seeds onto Victor's face and neck. Sticky things. They would have clung. They would still be there, buried in that black shell with him, waiting. Mistletoe. Old magic. The kind the witch in the forest had taught me about a long time ago. A plant that clings where nothing should grow, that stays green through the dead of winter, that takes hold of a living thing and will not let go. A small, stubborn life. The exact opposite of the death he had made of himself. I had almost nothing left. I gathered up what there was anyway. "Together, Sarah," I said. She did not ask the plan. She never does. She set her shoulders, lifted the short sword, and ran when I ran. The barrier rose to meet us, that wall of cold black air, and Victor's contempt rose with it. He told us, in the grand way he told everyone everything, that we were throwing our lives at a god. I let him talk. 8 paces. 6. The drain clawed at the edges of us, and the mint we wore drank the worst of it and held, the way it had held upstairs. 4 paces. I reached past the barrier, not with my hand, but with the one part of me that had ever truly been good for anything. "Old magic," I said, and I woke the seeds. They answered all at once. Mistletoe burst out of him, through his face, his neck, his scalp. Pale green and impossibly fast, vine and leaf and berry erupting in a tangle that climbed over his skull quicker than thought. He clawed at it. I felt his concentration shatter against the shock of it, felt the impossible thing happening to a god happening anyway. Through the noise of it, I caught the edge of his voice, no longer grand, gone high and cracking, asking what was in his head, what was growing in his head, and the black barrier, with his will torn off it, guttered and broke. "Now," I breathed. Sarah was already moving. She drove her short sword through the gap where the shell had been, past the torn coat, straight into the black crystal in his chest, and she put every year of her life behind it. A sound came out of her, raw, all of it at once. The blade bit. The crystal cracked, a thin white line, then a web of them, and then it came apart. For a moment, the world went silent. It was the kind of silence that follows a sound too large for the ears to keep. The courtyard, the gray sky, the broken stones, all of it holding still. The light went out of him, not slowly. Between one heartbeat and the next, the thing that had been Victor simply stopped, and the shape of him began to fall in on itself, dry and gray, crumbling from the chest outward. "Run, Sarah!" I grabbed her arm and hauled her back as he came down, the whole weight of what he had been collapsing into a heap of ash and broken stone where he had stood. We cleared it by a stride. The last of my magic went out with the last of him, and I felt the empty floor of myself scraped clean. The wind came through the courtyard and took him. It moved the gray of him across the flagstones in a thin drift, and I stood there with nothing left in me and watched it go. And I thought of a coin. He had stood in a throne room a lifetime ago, beautiful and bored, and flicked a single gold piece at my feet. He had told the whole court that this was the sum of what I was worth, one coin for a life, and gone back to his wine before it stopped ringing on the floor. I had carried the cold little weight of that sound for years. I had measured myself against it more mornings than I will ever admit to anyone. I had wanted, more than I let myself know, to make him answer for it, for me, for Sarah's face, for Holly, for Mia, for the salt and the ships, and every name he had spent like loose change on his climb toward godhood. The wind thinned him across the stones until there was nothing left to gather. There was not even enough of him now to make the sound that coin had made when it struck the floor. Sarah sagged against me, the two of us holding each other up by accident more than design. Her sword hung from her hand. She looked at the drift of ash and the empty torn coat lying in it, and her voice came out rough and disbelieving. "Adrian, did we get him?" I did not have an answer yet. The doubt sat in me even then, a splinter I could not pull. But I held her up, and she held me, and for a breath, I let myself believe it. Boots hammered across the courtyard. Gareth came first, sword still drawn, his face wild, shouting Victor's name as a question. Where was he? Where had he gone? Walter was a step behind him, moving faster than a man his age had any right to. The Count saw the two of us standing in the wreck, and the fight went out of his shoulders all at once. He crossed to us and gripped us both, one hand to each, hard enough to hurt. We had done everything, he said, everything. He could barely get the word out the second time. Walter had stopped at the edge of the ash. He was looking down at the torn coat, at the pale green still tangled there, the mistletoe gone limp now that the thing it had killed was gone. Something moved in his face that I had never seen on it before. Not quite a smile, quiet, satisfied. "It's the mistletoe," he said softly. It was your seed," I told him. "We don't stand here without it." Sarah shook her head, finding her feet. "We could never have done this alone," she said. "Not the two of us, not any two of us." And she was right. There was a long chain of small things behind us, holding us up, and his seed was only the last link in it. I should have known better than to let my shoulders drop. The ash stirred. It was a small thing at first, a curl of gray lifting against the wind instead of with it. Then, dark tendrils threaded up out of the heap, gathering the drift back to themselves, and a knot of it pulled together, mistletoe and ash and old hate, holding the faint shape of his face. Two ragged dark wings spread from it, thin as a bat's, and the awful little thing lifted off the stones. It told us, in a voice gone thin and buzzing, that it would call today a draw, that it would be back, that next time it would return a god, the one true ruler, and the world would finally learn what it had thrown away. Sarah screamed at it to come down and fight, coward that it was. It only climbed higher. Gareth roared an order, and boughs came up along the wall. Arrows went into the gray. They passed through the smoke of it and clattered down empty. A soldier flung the last scrap of his magic after it, and it caught nothing. The thing climbed, jeering, beyond the reach of the arrows, beyond the reach of any of us, and my well was dry, and Sarah's arms were shaking, and I had nothing left to throw. Then the light changed. It happened so fast that for a moment, I thought my exhausted eyes had invented it. The flat gray overhead darkened, bruised, gathered itself into a low black ceiling of cloud, where a heartbeat earlier, there had been nothing but a tired morning sky. The air went tight. The hair on my arms lifted. Somewhere behind me, a soldier asked, in a small voice, whether my magic was spent, whether I was doing this, and I was not. I had nothing left to do it with. The thing that had been Victor hung up there in the dark, still climbing, still promising us its return. The sky answered for me. A single bolt came down, white, enormous, so bright it printed the whole courtyard onto the backs of my eyes, and it struck the small, flying horror dead center. There was a crack like the world splitting along a seam. When my sight cleared, there was nothing left of him at all. Not ash, not a wing, not a curl of smoke. The lightning had taken every last scrap and left only the smell of it on the air. The silence after that one was different. It had room in it. Hooves and boots poured in through the gate. At the head of them came Evelyn, spectacles flashing, the border guards streaming behind her in their green sashes. And there, swaying on a borrowed horse, looking as though the storm had startled him more than anyone, was Hugo. They had made it back, Evelyn called out, breathless and fierce. It had been right to chase that presence down. They had felt the wrongness of it from miles off and ridden the horses half to death to reach us. Hugo looked at the scorched place in the sky where the thing had been. He looked at the courtyard full of people staring at him. He looked at the wand still smoking faintly in his own hand, as if it had gone off without bothering to ask him first. "Did I do something again?" he asked, and the courtyard broke. I have heard cheering before. I had never heard anything like what went up off those broken stones. Soldiers who had been ready to die a minute earlier were on their feet roaring his name and ours, throwing their helmets, gripping each other, laughing and weeping in the same breath. Gareth was bellowing something about the finest thunder mage in the north. Hugo, slowly waking to the truth that he had just ended the man who unmade kingdoms, went the deep red of a beat and tried to climb back off his horse to hide. Sarah leaned her forehead against my shoulder and let out one long, shaking breath. The man who had measured every life in gold, who had priced mine at a single coin and the world at whatever he could drain out of it, was gone, undone in the end by the small green things he had been far too proud to look at. A banished D rank and a knight they had thrown away had brought down the genius the kingdom worshipped, and the whole North March had stood in this courtyard and watched it happen. It should have felt like everything. It felt like most of it, because even there, with Sarah breathing against me and the cheering rolling over us both, I could feel the old burn scars under her hair where my hand had come to rest, the ones I had promised myself I would heal one day, and had not yet. And somewhere far beneath the relief, quiet as a held breath, was the thing none of us had answers for, the light that had ended the old world once already, the question the witch in the forest had never quite let me finish asking. The debt was paid. The threat was ash, but I had lived enough by then to know the difference between the end of a battle and the end of a story. We had won the morning. The rest of it was still out there, waiting for us to be ready for it. The cheering did not last the night. By sunrise, the great hall had been stripped of its banquet tables and filled with cots, and the cots were full. Victor was dust on the courtyard stones. The work he left behind was not. I had slept maybe 2 hours, and my shoulder still pulled where his beam had caught me. But there was one thing I could do that no healer in the North March could, so I did it. Their medicine was dried, and dried herbs are slow to give back what they hold. So I took a bench with a basket of brittle gray stems in my lap, closed my hand around them, and called them home. That is the truth of the gift they branded worthless when I was a boy. I do not mend a wound. I wake a dead thing. The shriveled valerian uncurled green between my fingers. The cracked comfrey went soft and living, and a whole winter of medicine came back at once, more than 10 gardens could have made. A line of village women worked beside me, grinding and bottling as fast as I revived, and one of them asked with a wink whether that tall knight lady of mine was spoken for. Gossip travels fast in the North March. Count Gareth moved through the hall all morning with his sleeves rolled, a lord doing the unglamorous work and meaning it. He had thrown the castle stores open before anyone asked, the hurt first. It was Evelyn who brought me the count near midday. More than 160 dead, and many times that number hurt. She said it plainly, the way you say a thing you cannot soften, then put her hand on my sore shoulder, by accident, and thanked me, even with my own wounds still open. That was the part I did not know what to do with. For most of my life, the people who outranked me had one word for my magic, and the word was nothing. Now a count had opened his stores on my say-so. His spymaster had thanked me before a full hall, and not one of them was laughing. The flowers that made me a joke at court had fed an army, healed a town, and ended the man who once priced my whole life at a single coin. I felt like the floor under an old verdict had quietly given way. Eric found me in the afternoon, still shy of the strangers, his hands twisting in his sleeves. The first thing he asked was whether I was hurt, 900 years old, and he fussed over me like I was the elder. I told him to sit and make himself useful, and he did, careful and quiet at the mortar. Holly and Mia came together a little later, and they were not all right. The drain Victor had pulled them under had left a mark that did not show on the skin. Holly's eyes were red, and Mia, who never lets anyone see her flinch, had a fist closed in the back of Holly's sleeve and would not let go. I set the basket down. "Come here," I said, and they did. I let them stand close while I worked, Holly grinding once her hands steadied, Mia bottling once she had something to put hers to. By the time the light went deep cheap amber, Mia was bickering with Eric over whose ointment was neater, which meant she was coming back to herself. We ate together that evening at the end of a long table. Sarah came in late and worn to the bone, her hair loose from its tie, and dropped onto the bench beside me without a word. Then she gathered Holly and Mia in against her sides, one under each arm, and some of the day went out of her shoulders. I watched her and let myself think a thing I had spent years refusing to think. Whenever the future came up, I would start the sentence, "If this fight ever ends," and never finish it. But the fight had ended. We were sitting at a table with food on it, under a roof that was ours, in a land where a count called us his and meant it. We had what I had wanted since the day they handed me one coin and a road out of the city, a safe place, and people in it who were mine to keep. So I finished the sentence, just once. "When things settle," I said, "I want to go home, to the village. All of us, if you'll come." Sarah looked at me over their heads. Something complicated crossed her scarred face, then eased. "Let's go home, Adrian," she said. "All of us." Holly wanted in before the question was done. Mia said where Holly went, she went. Eric asked very quietly whether there was room for him too, and looked so braced to be told no that Mia threw a bread crust at him for it. I did not say the other thing, the one I kept folded small and private behind my ribs. Hartwell is where Sarah and I grew up. When we reach it, on our own ground, that is where I will ask her. Not here, in a borrowed hall that still smelled of medicine. There. The scars on her cheek caught the lamplight when she laughed. I had sworn once that I would heal those. I had not yet. That promise and this one could travel the same road home. A month went by, faster than any I could remember. The North March healed the way a strong body heals. Quick at the surface, slow underneath, but healing. Walking the halls with Sarah, the scorch scrubbed off the courtyard and the cots folded away. It was hard to believe how far the place had come. We talked about the news that had everyone busy. 2 weeks back, riders had reached a land far to the south, Southreach, another place that had lived through the disaster that ended the old empire. The day before, the two lands had signed a treaty of friendship and trade. "Every night ends eventually," Sarah said, walking with her hands laced behind her head. "Even the long ones. Gareth had sent for us." He stood behind his desk with Evelyn beside a map of the territory and came to the point, the way he comes to everything, which is bluntly. He had a job for the two of us, a survey of the western lands, to look for villages that might have lived through the light of destruction the way the North March had. He could not give us the reward we were owed, he said, so we should take our time out there and rest our bones while we were at it. It took me a moment to hear what he was really saying. Then Evelyn traced a line west across the map, and it ran straight through a valley I knew better than any place on earth. He was sending us home. He knew we ached for the village, knew we would never take a reward that looked like charity. So he had dressed it up as duty and aimed the duty at our own front door. The route passed through Hartwell. That was no accident. It was a gift from a man too gruff to call it one. "Thank you, Count," Sarah said, and her voice did something it almost never does in front of officers. Truly. He waved it off and muttered about staking ground before the Southerners did, and would not quite meet our eyes, which is how I knew I had read him right. We left 2 days later. The yard beside the castle was loud with horses and drilling soldiers at dawn. Our escort was a survey unit of 8 aging veterans and a woman officer who carried more books than weapons, and a white-bearded captain laid out the mission. A survey of the unexplored West, the Gardenia Knights riding along, to be set down near Hartwell and collected 3 days on. The 3 of them had packed like we were moving house. Holly's bag was all clothes and snacks. Mia had a fishing rod and a bug net, and Eric wore the green mantle the princess had made him, his little wyvern Pip asleep on the head of his staff. Not everyone was glad to have us. A lieutenant crossed the yard while I checked the packs, small blonde hair tied back, sharp-eyed, the kind of officer who reads people for a living, Rosie. She looked me over and asked plainly what use a D rank would be if the West turned out to have teeth. My attendants could play tourist, she said, but she needed me able to hold up in a fight. Sarah started to bristle on my behalf. I put a hand on her arm. "Then let me show you one thing," I said. A straw practice dummy was lashed to a post at the edge of the yard. Fire is not my gift. It takes a slow count of 20 to ready, where the green comes instant, but I had the 20 seconds. I spoke the long words under my breath, and the dummy went up in one clean rush and stood there as a black skeleton of ash before the straw had time to scatter. The yard went quiet. Rosie looked at the ash, then at me, and to her credit did not flinch from being wrong. "My apologies," she said. "I doubted you wrongly." Beside me, Sarah looked fit to burst. "See?" she said, To no one in particular. Told you. The road west ran through kind country, gold fields, and gentle hills, and we rode the second of 3 wagons with the canvas rolled back to let the sun in. Somewhere in the second hour, Holly asked why I leaned on the flowers when I could throw fire like that, so I told her the truth. The fire is slow and borrowed, a long chant for one burst, while the green answers the instant I ask. You're magic, the one that makes things bloom. It's gentle, she said, picking at her sleeve. I like it better. Fire's a little scary, then smaller. Could I be a mage too? The question caught me off guard, and then it didn't. There had been a witch on the edge of my village when I was young, the first and only one who ever looked at a worthless D-rank boy and saw a gift in him. She had been right when the whole world was wrong. There's a witch back home, I told Holly. She saw what I could do before anyone else did. When we get there, I'll have her take a look at you. Mia's hand shot up. She wanted a look too. Eric said he was coming along as well, and Pip chirped like he had a stake in it. I let them argue and looked west, where the hills folded toward a valley I had not seen since before the sky tore open and the old world ended in light. Nobody could tell us whether the village still stood. The disaster that spared the North March might have spared a hamlet too deep and too poor to matter, or it might not have. There was a question waiting at the end of that road, and a question I was carrying to ask once we got there, and I did not know which would be answered first. 3 more days. Then home, whatever home turned out to be. For 2 days, the survey had crawled along a strange seam in the world. White salt desert on one hand, deep green forest on the other, the two of them running side by side like a wound that had never learned to close. Somewhere past that white waste lay the valley I had not let myself picture in 5 years. The old captain reined in where the trail split and looked at me from under his white brows. He did not ask why we wanted the mountain road. He had carried enough years to know that some roads a man has to walk on his own feet. Take care, Adrian, he said, and that was all. Rosie was less gentle about it. She leaned down from her saddle, sharp and unwilling to let sentiment ruin a schedule, and reminded us that the meeting point was the next evening, the same spot, and that she would not hold the column for stragglers. No excuses. I told her we would be there. Behind me, Mia muttered that we would probably beat them home and have dinner waiting, and Pip chirped from Eric's shoulder as if he agreed. Then the convoy rolled on south, and the 6 of us turned north toward the mountain. It went quiet very fast. The wheels and the harness jangle faded, and then it was just our boots on the old stone and the wind moving in the high pines. Sarah walked at my side, one hand resting easy on the saber at her hip, her blue ponytail catching the light. The dried lilac sprig pinned over her heart had gone the color of old paper years ago. She had never once taken it off. The path remembered us before we remembered it. Sarah found the old signpost first, a gray leaning thing with the names worn off it, tilted at an angle no honest carpenter would ever have allowed. She laughed, and it was the first real laugh I had heard out of her in weeks. She had knocked that post crooked when she was 9, she told the others, racing me down the hill on a dare, and her father had spent a whole afternoon trying to set it straight and finally given up and left it leaning. Hearing her say, "my father," without flinching, loosened something in my chest. We were almost home. It was close enough to taste. Holly walked beside me with her hand tucked into mine, the way she did when she was happy, and did not have the words for it. Her pack was nearly as big as she was. Eric noticed it sagging on her shoulders and, without a word, lifted the heavy roll of bedding off the top and slung it over his own. He still went shy when anyone thanked him, so Holly only squeezed my hand a little harder and let him be kind in peace. Mia, of course, had her net out before we reached the first switchback. She pounced on a lizard sunning itself on a rock, came up triumphant, and held it out for everyone to admire. That was a mistake. Pip launched off Eric's pack, snatched the thing clean out of her fingers, and swallowed it whole. Mia's outrage echoed off the whole mountainside. Eric apologized for his wyvern with the grave dignity of a man who had given that exact apology many times before. I let myself enjoy it. After everything, the ship, the salt fields, the long war with a man who thought the world was his to spend. This was the thing I had actually wanted, a loud, ordinary walk home with the people who were mine. I should have known the world was not done taking things from me. Where the trail squeezed between 2 boulders, something was waiting for us. It was a boar, a big tusked thing, shoulders like a barrel, planted square in the only gap wide enough to pass. Sarah's hand went to her saber out of pure habit. Mia dropped into a crouch. I felt for the cold dirt under the moss and started reaching down into the roots there, ready to wrap its legs if it charged. Eric stepped past all of us. He did not raise a hand or a weapon. He just stood in front of the animal, very still, his red eyes half closed, and asked it for something. Not out loud, not in any words I could hear. After a moment, the small black eyes lost their edge. The boar huffed, swung its great head once, and stepped down off the trail into the brush, leaving the road open. I asked it to let us pass, Eric said, almost apologizing, and it agreed. He could reach the clever ones, he reminded me, the ones with real minds behind their eyes. Not slimes, not the dull and the mindless, but a creature that knew the mountain it lived on. That one would listen. Sarah let go of her sword and told him he was the most useful person she had ever traveled with. He looked down at his own boots and said nothing, but the tips of his pointed ears went dark, and I knew he was pleased. We climbed the last of it together. The trees began to thin. The light got wide and white ahead, the way it does just before a trail breaks out onto open height. I remember thinking the village would be down there waiting in the green. I remember being glad. We came out onto the ridge, and the valley was gone. I do not have a better word for it. Hartwell had sat in a bowl of land carved out by an old glacier, green and watered, a river running bright through the middle of it, near 500 people living on dairy and hunting and the slow good business of staying alive. Houses, fences, a mill, the little church. All of it was white sand, not burned, not broken. There was no ash heap, no fallen timber, no black ground. Those things at least would have told a story I could read. This was worse. The whole bowl of the valley had been turned to fine pale sand, smooth and shining and dead, lying in soft dunes where streets had been. The river was a dry white scar. The fields were white. The midday light came off all of it in one flat glare that made my eyes ache. Only one thing still stood. At the far edge, where the church had been, the stone bell tower rose up out of the sand, broken off halfway, leaning, its bell long since fallen and gone silent. One gray finger of rock pointing at the sky, in a valley with no other shadow in it. I understood, standing there, what those maps had been trying to tell me for 2 days. The light of destruction that ended the old world had come up out of the south, and the valley's own stone had drunk it in and held it and let it burn everything clean. The forest above the ridge had been spared. The home below it had not. We had walked through living green all morning, straight toward this. Beside me, Sarah made a sound I had never heard her make. Not a word, just a small broken breath. The breath of someone whose mind has not yet caught up to what her eyes are telling it. Then she ran. She ran down the slope into the white, and I went after her, the sand giving under my boots like dry snow, soft and soundless, swallowing every footfall so that even our running made no noise. Sarah stopped where her house had been. There was nothing left to mark it. No doorstep, no hearthstone, no scorched beam. Only a low rise in the sand, a little taller than the dunes around it, where the largest home in the village had once stood. She went down onto her knees in it. She dug both hands into the sand and brought up 2 fistfuls and let it pour out between her fingers, white and fine and gone. And then she did it again and again, as if somewhere under all that pale nothing, she might find one hard true thing to hold on to. "It's gone," she said. Her voice had no fight left in it at all. All of it. "It's all gone, Adrian." I knelt down behind her and put my arms around her and did not tell her it would be all right, because it would not, and she would have known the lie the second it left my mouth. So I just held on. Her family had been a respected hunting line, generations of them rooted in this valley. She had carried their name through a war and the end of the world like a banner. Now the name had no ground left to stand on, but the patch of sand where I was holding her. Holly came down last, slow, her ears flat against her hair. She knelt a little way off and folded in on herself, and when she finally spoke, it came out in pieces. She was sorry, she said. On the road that morning, before the signpost, before any of us could see a single thing wrong, she had smelled it. Only ash, no wood smoke, no animals, no people on the wind, just ash, drifting down off the valley. And she had not said anything because she had not wanted it to be true, and she had thought that maybe if she never said it out loud, she might still be wrong. I reached out and drew her in against my side too, the scarred knight under one arm and Holly under the other. "You didn't do this," I told her. "Smelling the truth is not the same as making it happen. You carried it alone all morning so the rest of us could have one more good walk up a mountain. That was a kindness, Holly, not a crime." Mia knelt in the sand in front of Sarah, and for once, she did not have a single joke ready. She tried a little, said something about how the riverbed was still down there, how they could clear it out and fish it again someday, how it did not have to stay like this forever. Her voice wobbled halfway through, and she gave up on being cheerful and just took Sarah's sandy hand in both of hers and held it tight. Eric stood over all of us with Pip gone quiet and small against his neck and said nothing, because there was nothing to say, and he was old enough to know that the nothing was the right thing to give. We stayed like that a long while, the 6 of us, in the white, under a sun that did not care one way or the other. I let the grief have its full size. It had earned that much. Whatever I did next, I was not going to do it by rushing her past this. When the worst of it had passed through her, when she had stopped shaking and gone still and tired against me, I helped her up, and the two of us walked together to the one thing the light had left standing. The bell tower threw the only shadow in the valley. We stood in it. Up close, the old stones were the same plain gray I remembered from 100 dull Sunday mornings as a boy, and the smallness of that the rock still remembered its own color when nothing else in the valley did, was almost more than the white sand had been. This was where I had meant to ask her. Not here, exactly. I had pictured a kitchen, a fire, her family 2 rooms away pretending not to listen at the door. I had carried the question all the way from the North March like a stone in my pocket, waiting for home. Home was gone. The question was still mine to ask, so I reached into my coat and took out the branch. It was a gardenia branch, dried to gray, brittle as a bird's bone. I had carried it out of this valley the day the old witch first woke the magic in me. Back when I was a boy with a gift everyone agreed was worthless, a knack for talking to plants, for coaxing the green back into dead things, in a world that paid only for fire and gold. I had kept that branch through every year of being called nothing, through the single coin they pressed into my hand the day they threw me out, through ships and salt and war. It was the last living thing I owned from the place where I grew up, and it had not been alive for a very long time. I held it in both hands and gave it what I had spent my whole life learning to give. It is hard to describe from the inside. I find the memory of green still folded up inside a thing, the shape it used to be when it was reaching for the sun, and I tell it gently that it is allowed to be that again. The gray branch warmed in my palms. A seam of green ran up the dead wood like water finding a crack. Buds swelled out of nothing, tight and pale, and then they opened, one after another, white gardenia flowers unfolding in the gold light until the whole dead branch was crowded with living blooms, and the smell of them rose up thick and sweet and impossibly alive in a valley where nothing else could grow. Sarah stared at it. The flowers were reflected, very small and very white, in her gray eyes. There was a promise I had made her once, a long time ago. Back when we were young and I understood nothing, after the fire that left its mark on her, I had sworn with all the certainty of someone who knew nothing about the world that one day I would find a magic strong enough to take the scars away, to fix her. She had kept a sprig of lilac from that day. The flowers had been blooming by her door, and she had pressed it and pinned it over her heart and worn it through everything since. For years I had thought of that promise as a debt I owed, a wound of my own that would not close until I had made hers disappear. Standing in the ruin of everything that had ever made the two of us, I finally understood that I had promised her the wrong thing. I held the blooming branch out to her. "Marry me," I said. She opened her mouth and I saw the old argument coming. The scars, always the scars. The thing she had decided long ago made her worth less than other people. So I said the rest of it before she could get there. I was not going to fix her, I told her. I had spent years thinking the kindest thing I could ever do for her was erase the marks on her face, and I had been a fool and a coward about it because those marks were the proof that she had walked through fire and come out the other side still standing, still herself. They were not damage. They were who she was. I did not want some other Sarah without them. I wanted her. The scar, the temper, the laugh that knocked signposts crooked, the whole stubborn living shape of her. And I wanted every part of it for the rest of whatever world was left. Whatever's left out there, I told her. Let's build it together. You and me, and every single one of them. I tipped my head back toward the three of them standing in the sand behind us, not even pretending anymore that they were not listening. For a moment, she only looked at me, and the tears that had been pure grief a minute ago had turned into something else now, running clean down the scarred side of her face without a trace of shame in them. Then she took the branch in one hand, grabbed the front of my coat with the other, and kissed me hard enough to knock the breath clean out of both of us. When she let go, she turned her face up to the empty sky over the dead valley, and she shouted. A raw, cracked, magnificent sound, the loudest thing that broken bowl of a place had heard in years. She had done it, she yelled at the sky. She had gone and gotten herself a husband. Holly burst into tears and laughter at the very same time. Mia whooped. Even Eric was smiling, openly. The shyness gone out of him for once. I stood there in the one shadow in the valley, holding nothing now but the woman I loved while she held a branch full of impossible flowers. And I let myself be happy in the worst place I had ever stood. Grief had brought us here. It did not get to keep us. We could not stay the night down there. There was nothing left to stay in, and Rosie's meeting point was a hard day's walk back the way we had come. So when the light began to go amber and then blue, we gathered ourselves up to climb back out. Sarah carried the gardenia branch the whole way, careful with it, as if it might break, though it would not now. Once I call a thing back to life, it tends to stay. She had her other hand wrapped in mine. The lilac was still pinned over her heart. I had a feeling she would wear them both from now on, the dead flower and the living one, and that neither of us would ever need to explain to anyone why. We had just turned for the trail when Holly stopped dead. Her ears came up, her nose lifted. She had gone very still in that way that meant she was reading something off the air the rest of us could not. And for one cold second, I was afraid she had found more ash. "Wait," she said softly. "That's not ash." She turned and faced the mountain, up past the ridge, into the high green where the light had never reached. "Smoke," she said. "Not a wildfire, and not a ruin. A small one, contained. The particular smell of a hearth, of wood smoke, and something cooking. The smell of somebody up there on the shoulder of Mount Harrow, who at that very moment was feeding a fire." We all looked up at the dark mass of the mountain. Somewhere in all that green, against every reason we had to expect it, a fire was burning that a living hand had lit. The valley behind us was a grave, but the mountain above it, it seemed, was not finished with us yet. Neither of us said the word out loud as we started to climb, but we were both thinking it with every step, that the light had taken everything down here in the bowl, and yet somehow, somewhere up in that green, against all of it, someone had lived. We left the dead valley behind and climbed into the living green. Up here there were birds, ferns wet against our knees, and threading down through the trees, the thin gray smell of a fire built on purpose. Holly walked point, nose lifted. "The thing on the wind was not ash," she said quietly, like she was afraid to break it. "Bread, wood smoke, and underneath it all, oddly, soap. Someone's up there," she said. "Someone alive. They're baking." Sarah's hand closed hard around my sleeve. The hope hit her face before she could stop it. A survivor, after everything below. Eric tipped his head back, red eyes going distant. He had sent Pip ahead and was borrowing the wyvern's sight from over the slope. A cabin, he told us, with a tended garden up the stream. That was when the old song came back. Sarah started humming it before I did, the one we'd grown up on in Hartwell, about the witch past the last fence who'd snatch you for her stew pot. "It was never just a song," I said. "We met her, you and me. We were 10 years old." Her mouth fell open. "The witch of the mountain, the one who, with a hand pressed flat against my chest, had told a worthless boy that the magic sleeping in him was not nothing and woke it. Her name surfaced, and I said it like a key turning. Eleanor." The path turned on us before the light did. One moment we climbed toward the smoke. The next, we had somehow walked past it, the same mossed boulder sliding by on our left for the third time. Mia growled that the mountain was playing with us. Sarah stamped a boot and demanded to know why we couldn't get a step closer. "Because she doesn't want us to," I said. "It's a barrier, a maze laid over the path. She's testing whoever comes knocking." I knew it the way you know a handwriting. 10 years ago, she had set me a test too, and the answer had been to stop trying to be clever, shut my eyes, and believe. Close your eyes, all of you. The looking is the trap. Watch your own feet and follow Holly's nose. Smell doesn't bend the way sight does. Holly went still under the weight of all of us trusting her. Then she squared her shoulders, took Mia's hand, and walked on with her eyes half shut. We went blind in a line behind her, hands on shoulders. The forest pulled at the edges of my mind, but I kept my faith in the young woman ahead, and the pulling thinned and let go all at once. When I opened my eyes, the smoke was right in front of us. The cabin sat in a clearing so peaceful it looked painted. Neat rows of herbs, a little smokehouse, a kettle steaming by the door. We had one heartbeat to take it in. Then the door banged open and a nightmare came howling out of it. A wild, white-haired hag in gray rags, one hand swinging a battered kitchen knife and the other clanging an iron pot like a war drum, shrieking that fresh young sprouts had come to her door and she'd have us all in the stew by moonrise. She did not, I noticed, come for me, nor for the swordswoman with the saber. She went straight for the gentlest soul among us and chased Eric 3 circles around the garden while he wailed that it absolutely should not be him. Mia shoved Holly clear and Holly went down in the ferns. The witch swept right over her without a glance, and Holly, flat on her back, blinked up and said, in genuine confusion, that the lady actually smelled really nice, like lavender and fresh bread. That was all I needed. No witch who means murder ignores the one who falls. I stepped into the next lap of the chase, planted my feet, and spoke gently into the noise. "It's good to see you again, Eleanor. It's been a long time." The knife stopped in the air. The pot went quiet. The wild eyes peered at me, then at Sarah behind me, and something old and amused settled into them as 10 years fell away. "Well," she said, lowering the cookware, "look how the two little weeds grew up." Inside, with the kettle singing and a plate of acorn cookies going round, she let the disguise fall away like a coat sliding off a chair. The hag was simply not there anymore. In her place sat a tall, graceful woman with ashen gray skin, long wavy hair the color of wood smoke, and pointed ears, a dark elf, with eyes the clear green of leaves held to the sun. Holly, delighted to be proven right, pressed a twist of spare salt into her hands and got a bar of handmade soap in return, and the last of the fear melted into the steam. Why the awful face? Mia wanted to know. Eleanor turned the cup in her long fingers and answered without any sting. The face kept the world away. It frightened off the bold young men with their flowers and foolishness, and spared her something worse than suitors. "I stopped letting myself grow fond of people," she said simply. "No matter how you love them, the short-lived ones always leave first. After enough centuries, a face that says, 'Go away' is a kindness, mostly to me." Then her green eyes moved to Eric, and her voice gentled in a way that made it heavier. He was dark elf, like her. He would wake and wake again, and walk on long after the rest of us were only a line of names he tried not to forget. Eric set his cup down with a shaking hand, and the joy of finding his own kind curdled into understanding what it meant. He insisted, almost begging, that it would not be like that we would simply stay together forever. The room went quiet around his small, breaking voice. Sarah stood up. She did not soften it, and she did not lie. Everyone at this table would die someday, she told him, herself included. That was the shape of being alive. But someday was not today. Today the bread was warm, the fire was lit, and every one of us was breathing. So we don't spend the time we've got being afraid of losing it, she said. We live, all the way down to the bottom of the cup. She jabbed a finger at him, fierce and bright. And you carry all of it with you afterward. That's not a curse, that's the job. Don't you dare cheat us out of it by mourning us before we're gone. I have heard a lot of speeches. That one I'll keep. Eleanor said nothing, but I saw the centuries shift behind her eyes and understood she had waited a very long time for someone to say it to her like that. Later, when the fire had burned to a red glow, she apologized for the teeth. She had been alone too long and forgotten the manners that go with company. Then, quietly, she told us how long. Over 1,000 years. She had slept through whole centuries and last woken near 300 years back, in time to watch her own people reach too far against humankind and be all but wiped from the world for it. She had walked away and stayed up here ever since. I thanked her then, properly. A stranger had once told a useless boy his magic was not worthless, and that boy had built a whole life on those few words. To show her what they'd grown into, I took a dead, dried sprig of mint from her herb bundle, cupped it, and gave it back its life. Green climbed the brittle gray stem, new leaves unfurled, and in a breath, the dead thing was fresh and fragrant. Eleanor leaned in, and the teasing left her entirely. She had seen many kinds of magic, she said, and almost none like this. Life called back into a thing the world had already given up on, a rare gift and an old one. The same current, she believed, that the ancients themselves had once used in the working they called star travel. She looked at my hands a long moment, as if seeing further down a road than I could. Then she turned that look on Holly, took her chin, and studied her. Something was budding in her too. Holly did not just smell the world, she read it. Grief on the morning wind, a survivor in the smoke, the truth of a heart under a frightening face, a real gift, waking. With teaching, it would become magic of her own. Holly's mouth fell open. Me? Real magic? Me? She looked to me to be told it was true, and I told her it was. Sarah clapped her hands and declared us a whole family of skills then and there. Holly the apprentice mage, Mia the apprentice knight, Eric my own student. Mia began to deflate at being the only one without magic, until Eleanor told her plainly that magic can also wake from nothing but a pure, honest wish, and a heart like hers was good soil. She sat up straight as a fence post. We bedded down warm and whole, the others breathing slow by the hearth. I thought we were done for the night, but as I rose to settle them, Eleanor caught my sleeve, and the warmth went out of her voice and left only weight. There was a truth about the light of destruction, she said, one she had carried alone a long time, and she needed me, of all people, to see it. Outside, the night had 2 moons in it, one blue and climbing, one red going down, and Eleanor stood waiting for me in their doubled light. She teased me first, the way you brace someone before a fall. She'd heard about the ring and the ruined valley, she said, and a witch's blessing on the marriage was the least she owed 2 weeds she had watched grow. I thanked her and told her the rest, that I meant to make Holly and Mia and Eric mine for good. My family, names and all. Whatever world was left to do it in. She nodded slowly, like a woman approving of a thing well planted. Then she drew a crystal ball from her shawl. Half of it was clouded a sick milky white. Scarred, she said, by the very thing it had recorded. Under all the grief of the last day, there had been one stubborn ember I never let anyone see. The impossible wish that the people the light had swallowed were not truly gone, only somewhere I couldn't follow. I had buried it because hoping felt like a way to hurt myself. She set the crystal on the wet grass, laid 2 fingers on it, and told me to watch the ground. Light spilled out of the crystal and painted a moving picture across the grass. And I was looking at the last day of the old world, the seized palace first, throne and gallery, and high gold doors. The rulers who had run that kingdom stood frozen among their treasure, turned at last into the lifeless gold they had worshipped. The queen a cold gleaming statue on her dais, an old marshal cast solid mid-stride, and walking among them, alive and laughing, untouched, was the gold mage who had thrown me away with a single coin. The vision gave me his face, but not his voice. Through Eleanor's memory, his gloating reached me only as a far-off, ugly sound. A man crowing that he alone deserved to inherit everything. The picture sank beneath the floors, into a deep stone chamber I never knew had existed. A vast engine waited there, fed by a ring of mages. I will not describe what was being done to make it burn, and neither did Eleanor, only that they were being spent like oil in a lamp, that it was quiet and terrible, and then it was past. He fired it. The mage laid his hand to the engine and woke it, and a wall of white tore up out of the deep and across the whole continent, and everything I knew was swallowed by the light. I waited for the picture to die into black. That was where the story always ended, in the white, in the nothing. It did not end. The light kept going. It poured on through a long dark that was not death, but distance, and at the far end it slowed, gathered, and opened into a world. A blue world, turning gently against the black. Seas, green land under drifting cloud. And when the vision drew close, a living city, full and lit and moving. People walking its streets under a sky that was not ours, but was unmistakably alive. I could not speak. Our world, but new. Eleanor's voice came soft beside me. The light had never been a weapon, she said. It had been a door. Long ago, in terror of the ancients, the old mages had built an escape. A working that faked the end of the world and carried it whole across the stars. What everyone had mourned as annihilation had been a departure. The world had not died. It had been lifted, remade, and set down living somewhere far away. We were the remnant, she told me gently. The little that had not made it through the door before it closed. The ancients themselves had already left this husk behind. But the people the light had taken were not in the white and the nothing. They were over there, on the blue world, going on with their lives. I asked her because I had to hear it shaped into a question, whether the ones we had lost might be alive, truly alive, only gone on ahead. She said yes. The grief did not vanish. It is not so easy as that, but something underneath it turned over and faced the light. For a whole year, I had carried the dead as dead. Now, with that blue world reflected in my eyes, I let myself believe the thing I'd been too afraid to wish. The wish I had buried so it couldn't hurt me was, all along, simply true. They're alive, I said. The words felt enormous and quiet in my mouth. Somewhere up there. They're alive. Eleanor let the crystal go dark, and the blue world faded back into the grass, and she put a hand on my shoulder the way she had put one on my chest 10 years ago. The same hand that once told a worthless boy he was not nothing at all. Now you know, she said. Go home and live, Adrian. All the way down to the bottom of the cup. Below us, the dead valley was still white and still silent, but the stars over it had changed for me entirely. They were not headstones anymore. They were a far shore, and for the first time since I had crested that ridge and seen my home turn to sand, I climbed back toward my sleeping family carrying something I'd not expected to ever hold again. Not the loss, but the hope hiding inside it. The mountain air had a bite to it that morning, the kind that woke you whether you wanted it or not. We carried the washing down to the stream below the cabin, where the water came off the high snow so cold it numbed your fingers in seconds. Holly knelt at the bank with a sheet bunched in her fists, scrubbing like she had been born to it. I'm good at this part, she said, and she was. Her hands moved quick and sure through the freezing water, the same hands that, a season ago, had been cracked and ruined from years of other people's laundry before I ever learned what my magic could do for skin and bone. She caught me looking and flexed her fingers at me, proud. Beside her, Mia hissed every time the current touched her wrists. It's freezing. Why is it always me who gets the cold jobs? I dipped my own face in and came up gasping. A little way off, Eric did the same. Pip balanced on his shoulder and leaning out to study the ripples with deep suspicion. Then a small thing happened, the kind kind nobody writes songs about. Holly wrung out a sheet, and a single soap bubble lifted off the water and went drifting up over the pines, turning gold in the light. We all stopped to watch it climb. Maybe the whole world is just a soap bubble, I said, thin as anything, and it still keeps getting made, over and over. Sarah came to stand at my shoulder, wiping her hands dry on her tabard. I had told her the night before, low and quiet while the others slept, what Eleanor had shown me in the crystal, that the light had never been the end of the world, only a door out of it, that the people we had lost were not gone, only gone on ahead, alive somewhere on a new blue world past the stars. She had stayed silent a long while after that. Now she watched the bubble pop somewhere high over the trees and let out a slow breath. It helps, she admitted. Knowing they might still be out there, living, it helps more than I want to say out loud. By the time the sun was full over the ridge, we had everything packed. Eleanor took her payment from Holly's bag, salt and sugar, flour and spices, the small sundries of a life lived alone, and counted it twice because some things about her would never change. Holly bounced on her heels the whole while. I'll work so hard, Adrian. I want to learn everything. Beside her, Mia stuck her chin out and announced she would train as a knight, a real one, so nobody would ever lay a hand on Holly again. Eric slipped back inside for a last word with Eleanor alone. When he came out, his eyes were red, and he wrapped his arms around her without a word. She let him. For someone who had spent 1,000 years keeping the short-lived world at arm's length, she let him hold on a long time. While they said their goodbyes, I turned to Sarah and asked the thing I had wondered about for years and never had the nerve to, how she had gotten the scar that ran from her brow down across her cheek. She told it plainly, the way she told everything. She had been a girl when a fever took me, the kind that killed children in our village, and she had carried me through a burning night to the only healer for miles. The healer had no gentle arts. He closed a wound the only way he knew, with heat, and the mark of it had stayed on her face ever since. I never minded it, she said, and shrugged. Eleanor had drifted close enough to hear. She studied Sarah's face with those clear green eyes and offered, kindly, that a small confusion spell could smooth the scar away, make it seem to vanish, if Sarah wished it. Sarah looked at her for a moment. Then she shook her head. No thanks, she said. I don't need it. Her hand came up and brushed the old burn. Easy, like touching a thing she was fond of. I've already got a husband who takes me exactly as I am. I felt my face go warm. Mia made a gagging noise. Holly clasped her hands together and sighed like she was watching a story. Eleanor only smiled, the small private smile of someone deciding she had let the right people in after all. She told Eric he could come back to see her whenever he liked, but him alone, no strangers. And then she gave us her blessing, the old kind, the kind a witch works quietly, whether you ask for it or not. In sickness and in health, she said, may you stay together, and may you all walk slowly, side by side. We started down the mountain together. I noticed it within the first mile. None of us was walking at our own pace. Eric had long legs and could have gone twice as fast. Sarah moved like a soldier, and Mia could scramble over anything, but nobody pulled ahead. We had all, without a word, slowed to the steps of whoever among us was slowest, so that the whole family stayed in one loose, easy knot along the path. That was the picture I wanted to keep, I think. Not the great battles, not the magic. Just 5 people and a small dragon, going home at the speed of the smallest among them, in no hurry to arrive. The road home was long. Somewhere along it, in a quiet little chapel with the family for witnesses and no crown in sight, Sarah and I were married. There were no flowers showered over us, no roaring crowd, just her hand in mine and the few words that mattered. It was the happiest day of my life, until it wasn't, because the days kept getting happier after. The world had changed in our absence. Count Gareth's frontier had become something larger, a free realm of its own, built out of every kind of person the old kingdom had thrown away, with its capital at Ashford. And Gareth, who had taken in a princess and her ragged column of the discarded, was about to take a crown. The house had been a wedding gift. Gareth gave it to us free and clear, then let us add a wide living room on the ground floor and 2 more rooms upstairs, one for Eric, one for Holly and Mia. After a life of stone floors and locked doors, the 3 of them still sometimes stood in the middle of it, just to feel that it was theirs. On the morning of the royal wedding, the place was chaos. Holly chased Mia around the table to fix her ribbon, finally pinning her down by the tail. Hold still, there! She stepped back, beaming, in the cherry red dress I had bought her. Mia tugged at her own blue skirts and declared that even a stray cleaned up fine in a proper dress, which made Holly laugh until she nearly lost the ribbon again. Eric was missing. Holly pressed her palm flat to the air, the way I had been teaching her, and a small ripple went out from the circle just waking on her hand. She tilted her head, reading something none of us could. "Found him," she pointed without opening her eyes. "Behind the house, out by the fields." He came in a minute later with Pip wheeling down out of the bright sky, a long trailing vine clutched in the little dragon's claws. Eric took it and held it out to me. "Brought you this. Looks like you're all ready." It was wisteria. Hard to find this time of year, which was exactly why I needed it. I thanked him and turned it over in my hands, checking the buds. Good. I had not fumbled the most important part before I even reached the square. Far across the city, a sound rolled over the rooftops, a single clean clap of thunder out of a clear sky. That was Hugo's signal, the lightning mage's idea of ringing a bell. The festival had begun. The square was a sea of people. I climbed the steps to the great stage at its heart, and the three of them came scrambling up behind me, and when the crowd realized whose family they were, a cheer went through it like a wave. Holly went pink to the ears. Mia waved at everyone like she had been waving at crowds her whole life. Walter stood among the dignitaries in his spotless black, and Evelyn beside him, and she gave me the smallest, driest nod, as if to say she had told me once that there was worth in things other people threw out, and here was the proof. Then the parade came up the avenue. Sarah rode at the very front of it, in the bright captain's armor of the Kingdom Knights she now led, her saber at her hip, and the old dried lilac still pinned over her heart. She did not smile on duty, but her eyes found me on the stage, and the scar she had refused to hide caught the sun, and that was better than a smile. Behind her came the open carriage, and in it, King Gareth and his bride. Diana stepped down in white, and the breath went out of the whole square at once. They came up onto the stage and stood before me, the frontier lord who had sheltered the lost and the princess who had chosen him. No blood between them, only a love that had outlasted the end of the world. I held out the wisteria. The vine left my hands and went looking for theirs on its own, the way living things did when I asked them nicely. It wound once around the king's wrist, crossed the small space between, and twined around the queen's, joining their two hands together. Then, all along its length, the buds opened at once, and the bare vine burst into a cascade of white wisteria, hanging in bells of bloom between them. Diana laughed out loud, pure and delighted. "Oh," she breathed. "How lovely!" The crowd roared. But I was not finished. I had spent the morning seeding the whole square in secret, dried petals tucked along the eaves, old seed pressed into the cracks between the stones, withered blooms hidden in every garland the city had hung. Now I reached for all of it at once and called it back to life. Wilt recollection had revived a single dead flower, once in a back room, while a court laughed at me. I let it off its leash over an entire kingdom. The square exploded into bloom. Flowers burst from the stones, from the rooftops, from the banners and the lampposts, and the rims of the fountains. And then the air itself filled, a slow blizzard of white petals drifting down over the king and the queen and the thousands of upturned faces below. People reached up to catch them. Children spun in them. The whole capital stood inside a falling garden, and at the center of it stood the man they had a name for now, the flower bringer. I want you to understand what that meant, standing there. A lifetime ago, I had stood in another grand hall, in front of another set of crowns. A gold mage who valued nothing he could not weigh had looked at my gift, the power to make dead things live, and judged it worthless. He had me thrown out the door and, as a parting joke, had a single gold coin pressed into my hand. The whole court had laughed. That coin was supposed to be the sum total of what I was worth. I had spent it on a beaten young woman everyone else walked past the first day. It had been the best money I ever spent, because everything I had now had grown out of that one coin and the choice I made with it. And here was the rest of the joke, the part the laughing court never lived to understand. They had thrown away the one kind of magic that could make a ruined world bloom again. They turned everything they touched to gold, and in the end, the gold just sat there, cold and dead, while every living thing they owned starved. They had measured me in metal and called it generous. Life beat gold. It always had. It just took me losing everything to prove it. Then a weight hit me in the chest, and another and another. Holly had thrown herself into my arms, petals caught in her hair, and her dog ears flat with joy, and she shouted it loud enough for the front rows to hear. "Adrian the flower bringer, I love you!" Mia crashed into my other side, too proud to say it the same way, settling for a fierce congratulations. That meant the exact same thing. Eric folded in more carefully, the way he did everything, but he held on just as hard. The 900-year-old boy who had woken alone in a dying world and would never, ever be alone again. Pip landed on my head and chirped, and across the stage, between the king and queen and the falling flowers, Sarah broke her duty long enough to look at me, scar and all, and let herself smile. I pulled the 3 of them in close. "I love you too," I told them. "All of them. Every single one of you." The petals kept falling. Somewhere past the stars, a lost world was turning, green and alive, carrying everyone we had ever grieved. And here, in this one, a court had once weighed a quiet boy with a useless gift, found him worth a single coin, and shown him the door. They got the price wrong. I was home, and I was rich beyond counting, and I would not have traded one petal of it for all the gold they ever made.